Start in 2 minutes.
All right, let's get started with Policy Board. If you can take your conversations outside in the hallway and take your seats. Very good.
Well done.
I know it. They listened. Good morning. Sorry for the delay in getting this started. We had a very busy executive committee meeting this morning, and I will provide you with that information here very shortly. You should have our agenda. If everyone's had an opportunity to look that over, I do have one other piece of other business for 2 lobster motions that Tony will talk about here shortly. But if there's no other business, is there other, Richie?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, Jim Gilmore isn't here yet, so Jim Gilmore and myself wanted to have a brief discussion about conservation equivalency.
Very good. So ordered. You got that down?
Yep.
Okay. Any other business for consideration now? I'll ask again at the end. All right. And if everyone has had an opportunity to review our proceedings from our February 15 meeting. So if there are no corrections or changes to either the agenda or the minutes, they will stand approved by consensus. Public comment. I don't have anyone signed up to speak, but you have somebody?
There was no one that signed up to speak, but I just wanted to note there was a letter with several slides on your briefing materials from Peter Paul on the future of our fisheries in your briefing materials, and I promised him I would note that that was there for your consideration.
Thank you. Seeing no hands up in the audience, we will move right into our first agenda item, which is an update from the Executive Committee. That's me. Yes. We just finished, so I should be able to remember this. We did have a closed session to start the meeting to discuss the Commission's budget issues. If you have interest of that to that nature, then we could talk about that offline. But we did have some, met our new staff, and they've done a staff survey. Feel that those surveys were very positive. Suggested that there are some good opportunities with the commission, and that the leadership is moving in the direction that we're happy with. So just further confidence shown in our executive director in the way that he's moving forward with some pretty sizable staff changes that have occurred, and so we look forward to working with and meeting our new FMP coordinators and other commission staff, and certainly appreciate those that have been here for a while and have that institutional memory that we need so much. And that was a general agreement amongst the executive committee, is that we do believe that it's important to have our staff with us for a period of time, and we all feel disappointed when we lose those coordinators that we've worked so well with and over the years, and many of us expressed very similar concerns about trying to retain our staff and make sure that they're happy. So they can always come and talk to me, or certainly their leadership is open door policy, and I believe the general sense of the executive committee was pleased with what's going on. Any questions on that part of the discussion? And is anyone from the executive committee, if they would like to add to that, I was asked how I was going to present that, and I did my best. We did discuss the Administrative Oversight Committee presented the budget, and that was approved. I don't believe we need to do that again, so I think we're all good there with the budget. We had some very good discussion on the appeals criteria. That we've recently had 2 appeals through the on striped bass. Many of us have never dealt with an appeal before. And so a lot of questions have arisen as to what the appeal process is and why it's established the way it is. We have made some decisions in moving forward that instead of the appeal deciders being the chair, vice chair, and immediate past chair, would be that we're going to task that with the AOC. That provides us with more broad opinion. It allows for our governor's appointees, legislative appointees, as well as our leadership to have a role in making the decision on whether to grant an appeal or not. And we've also discussed ways to streamline the appeal process, narrow that window just a little bit, and we'll be working with staff and our staff attorney to develop those issues for, I believe it was we will discuss that at our August Executive Committee meeting. So the AOC is going to be busy over the summer. Anything else on that issue, on the appeals? Doug?
Just a brief clarification for some of the policy board members that aren't involved with the appeal. What the suggested changes was for the AOC to be the body that's going to determine whether there's validity in the appeal, because our appeal process originally said that the chair, vice chair, and past chair determined the validity, and if it was determined to be valid, it would come to the policy board for full consideration at that. There's sort of the filter to see if the appealers met one of the 5 criteria that are in our appeal process, and then it comes to the full policy board if we feel that it meets one of those criteria for decision. They aren't the final arbitrators, in other words.
Thank you for that clarification. That was the meat of our discussion, was in the appeals process. I thought we had a very good discussion about that. We've also asked the Administrative Oversight Committee to look at the way that we handle committee reports from our advisory panels and our law enforcement committees and perhaps even technical committees based on some concerns that were expressed at the executive committee level. So the AOC will be looking at that issue as well. And I will be, I've got some folks I'd like to talk to, but try to restructure not restructure, but get some new membership onto the AOC, and with try to make sure that we've got good coverage on that committee. So anything else from any executive committee members on issues I forgot, or I did have to step out of the room a couple of times, but hopefully that covers our executive committee well. Any questions? Okay. Next item on the agenda is the commissioner survey results, and I'll turn that over to Tony.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to thank Louis and Doug for helping me revise the commissioner survey. We did make it shorter this year, and I think it had a positive effect because 35 commissioners filled it out, which is the highest number we've ever had in participation, so thank you all. I'm going to report out on the items where we received less than 7.5 in satisfaction, so a 10 10 is very satisfied and 0 is not satisfied at all with how things are going. And as a reminder, this survey is to measure the progress that commissioners feel that they are making in their role as the commission and how the commission is moving forward with our vision and goals. So the first item where we had less than 7.5% or 7.5 satisfaction is the level of cooperation with our federal partners. And we saw that level of cooperation, I don't think that folks have felt much has changed since last year, although over the time period we have been moving forward in an upward direction for the most part. Next is the commissioner's relationship with constituents. It's just below 7.5, and we've sort of steadily been moving forward with a small dip in the last year. And then how well we are doing in securing fiscal resources. We've had a drop down. Folks have felt that we're not doing quite as well this year as we did last year. And then we added a couple of new questions to the survey, so there is no time series for these questions, but how satisfied are you with the Commission's progress to end overfishing? And this was our lowest scoring question with a 6.66. And then how satisfied are you with the Commission's ability to manage rebuilt stocks? And that's just over 7 at a 7.17. And then lastly is how satisfied are you with the products of the ISFMP and Science Department, and respectively the scores were 7.5 and 7.0. Some of the open-ended questions, the biggest obstacles to success, some of the common themes that we saw are coordination with other entities, either councils or fishing groups, baseline shifts over the past decades, as well as climate change, accurate, credible science that may lead to correct decisions. Rebuilding stocks is not a function of managing fishing effort only. We also have to look at natural mortality and non-fishing induced human mortality, which the Commission has little control over. And on the management side, too many states are willing to vote for tough measures for other states while jealousy is guarding their own shares. Some of the more useful Commission products that you reported back on are FMPs with clear objectives, the website, briefing documents well in advance of the quarterly meetings, our press releases, fisheries focus, and species overviews, and stock assessments, especially the annual summaries of stock status and trends. Additional materials that you feel might be useful to commissioners to help you do your jobs better. Regularly scheduled informational webinars for the evenings for the general public on issues of interest to try to draw in more participation by our constituents, as well as states could benefit by more outreach from the Commission that explains to the states, the fishermen, they have flexibility in many aspects of forming final ASMSC decisions, and that's in the theme of getting your constituents more involved in the Commission. You felt like we could expand on some of the annual summaries of stock status and trends in more layman's terms. Again, this theme of information for constituents and improving some of the decision documents that we provide prior to management decisions. We can also focus some more time on ecosystem-based management, climate change, ocean acidification, either getting rid of the species on the Commission's list that don't have action on them in the recent years, or develop a timeline to have those species assessed so that we can start considering action for those species. We need to find a better way to incorporate habitat into our fisheries management plans, mitigate the regulatory whiplash we see in some of our species management, have cooperation between the states as well as our federal partners, and to focus more time on the different legislative reauthorizations such as Magnuson and ACFACMA. Also put more time on commissioner training and shifting species distributions reallocation between states and sectors. Other comments that were in the general category was to revisit the purpose of compliance reports, look at the meeting time scheduling. We sometimes spend too much time for some species and not enough on the more important species. Excluding stakeholders from meaningful input during the stock assessment process and other scientific inquiries, it undermines the quality of the Commission's work. We need to improve the use of Management and Science Committee. They do a lot of good work, but its contributions are not always fully appreciated by the board. And I thought I would end on a very positive comment on staff. While fisheries management through the Commission is often slow and frustrating, it's hard to think of an alternative that would work better, and that's thanks to the excellent work done by staff, that folks do a phenomenal job on a very tight budget, and we appreciate those positive comments to staff greatly. And so I thought we could go back to some of the measures where we had lower scores, and if we could have a quick discussion on ways that maybe we could work on improving some of these relationships, either with our federal partners, our constituents to start with, and then move down to see how we can help you do these things better to improve our scores for next year.
Sounds like fun.
Well, if that's what you guys want to do.
Yeah, I think that's a good suggestion. And so I guess the first one is we ranked cooperation with federal partners fairly low in comparison to some of the others. So are there comments or suggestions on how we might improve that? Richie?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Not a comment on how to approve, but I would look at that as being pretty consistent. The 7.21 to 6.8, I mean, I don't think that's changed much. You had that one dip, but you have a turnover in commissioners, and commissioners might rate things a little bit differently, new commissioners coming in. So I don't see that as a big negative from the standpoint of a change. I think it's been pretty consistent.
Pat?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Question that came to my mind when we talk about cooperation with federal partners. Are we talking strictly about financial support? I looked at that as a broader picture, federal partners being counsel. Is there a distinction that you were trying to make here? We're talking primarily financial. It seems to me that as hard as we're working to get more money to support our activities, we're just not getting there. The money's not there, the budgets are being cut, and so on. So if you want to address that, I'd like to talk about that. Is it taking, Mr. Bullard and putting him against the wall and tacking him up and saying, hey, we need more money? Or is it NIMS, or is it right at the top to our new NOAA director? It just seems to me that the way our case is being presented, in past it's been good, but we're nice people. We're not nasty people. We're not demanding that we need this to support our activities, and we are supporting an economy for all 15 states. And maybe our cell picture has to be much more the total economic impact, individually and collectively, that we're having on the East Coast economic position. So it just seems to me that we ought to break down which way we want to go, decide not to be nice people anymore, and get real aggressive. And I'm not sure it's going to our congressman that's going to make it happen. If the money is being allocated to NOAA, it seems that we've got to go either to NOAA, if we can't get it from them, get some from NIMS, but I think it's got to come right from the very top and concentrate our efforts on that. Expand this. Now we're going to have the states taking over MRIP. What's going to happen there if, in fact, the states really don't have the ongoing support from the financial side, from NOAA? Money is being allocated to the states. I'm looking beyond that. Will the states turn around and say, hey, thank you very much. We don't have any state money because now your budget's going to be cut again. to do the job. So in terms of looking at the direction that we're going, if we're going to go state by state for MRIP as one of the major programs that's going to support our activities in the future, it seems to me that we've got to go back to the top, hit NOAA at the top, and say, here's what it's going to take. And we don't need it for 1 year. We want to put this plan out there for 5 or 10 years and just basically demand it. And so that's that side. On the other side of it, if we're talking about federal partners from the councils, are we getting our fair share of when stocks are rebuilt? One of the next slides that will come up will talk to that. Are we getting the biggest bang for our buck? We're doing what we can to rebuild our stocks, and yet do our fishermen, commercial and recreational, gain benefit from it, have done that? So when we get to that slide, I'd like to address that again. If you'd like to address either one of those, Mr. Chairman, I'd like to hear your answer.
I don't think that the question is related to financial issues particularly. I think that it's a conglomerate of opinion. My opinion may be different one day than the next, depending upon the answers I get from NIMS. When I fill out the survey. But I personally see that we're seeing some improved communication with NIMS. I certainly appreciate the fact that Mr. Bullard is here and he comes so that he can meet with the commission and the state directors, and I think that's a positive thing. I'd love to see more of that from our South Atlantic partners, and I don't think that would surprise them. I mean, it was wonderful to see Heather. She was here for about an hour, a representative from the South Atlantic, but we don't tend to get that same level. I think some of the frustration, though, is the financial part. The fact that the money's going up in the budget for the councils and the commissions, but we're staying steady and not seeing those increases. I don't think we sell ourselves very well when it comes to the information that we provide to National Marine Fisheries Service and the council process. And I feel more and more strongly about that all the time, in that if we weren't going out to the fish houses and we weren't collecting the information and aging the fish and providing, sending staff to the CDARs and to the stock assessment things, what would they do? We're a critical cog in the management wheel, but we don't seem to have any leverage with all that information. I'm a $25 million agency, that collects tremendous amounts of fisheries independent, fisheries dependent data. What if I withheld that information from the federal government and said, you want it, you pay for it? We're not doing that unless we all collectively use that, develop that clout. I don't see things are going to really change that much because Eileen, I think, is interested. She participated in the San Diego meeting. She's very approachable, I think. But I think until we move in some type of direction like that we're probably going to get the hind you-know-what on a regular basis. So that's my opinion to your comments. I got Tom Fody.
I guess, unlike Pat, I looked at it strictly on how we basically communicate what we're doing on certain species. And I'll just bring up 3 incidents in the last 2 years. One was winter flounder. Here we have strict regulations at the commission level, and all of a sudden we're putting 5,000-pound trip limits up in the New England Council without any consultation with the Atlantic States Marine Fisheries Commission on a stock we're supposed to be jointly managing. The other one was the listing of sturgeon by the National Marine Fisheries Service, which caused the states a lot of money, a lot of time, and a lot of effort. And, there was one agency, and I won't get them into an agency argument here, but there was one agency that did not support the listing. We didn't support the listing, and yet they went ahead with the listing, which caused us all kinds of problems at the state level. And then I look at the management of black sea bass, summer flounder, and scub, and we've been in this, catch-22. I mean, I remember asking the question, and not only me, one of the head scientists at the same time asking the question, when are we going to go from a tier 3 or a tier 4 to a tier 3, and why are we going to not, since we have the most information about summer flounder, when they're going to go to a tier 1 or 2? He says, it'll probably never happen. And we're both looking at him and saying, well, that's not the way you work this game. So we're taking away quotas. So, and again, on the research set-aside things, there was a few things done. So I think some of that's being corrected by the Mid-Atlantic Council. Well, that's what I'm looking at as cooperation. And in those 4 instances, they didn't shine. And that's one of the reasons I always rate it low. I mean, and I know, Louis, you were not happy with the listing, as unhappy as I was on that, without any consultation that we felt was meaningful.
Dr. Pierce?
Yeah, setting aside discussions about fiscal matters and budgetary concerns, I'll focus on the current cooperation with federal partners, and I speak with sort of a parochial interest here or focus. New England, Massachusetts, and this is through ASMFC and, of course, through the New England Council, and that is, in recent years, I've seen a dramatic turnaround with regard to cooperation with federal partners, specifically with the National Marine Fisheries Service in our region, the regional office, and the Northeast Fisheries Science Center. And the reasons for that have been John Bullard. Okay, you've already mentioned him. He's here, always open for opinion and looking for compromise and to provide federal assistance and looking for reciprocation. And we assist him. And then there's the Northeast Fisheries Science Center with Dr. Bill Karp. New on the same, and frankly, I think that our relationship, the ASMFC relationship and the Council relationship with the Northeast Fisheries Science Center has improved dramatically because of the leadership of Dr. Karp. So let's face it, it all comes down to personalities, who's sitting in the seat, relationships that are developed. That's key to cooperation. So I would, with that said, I would suggest, as a way to increase cooperation with federal partners, we need to do something that's especially important now because of new staff. And the new ASMFC staff and those who have been on the staff for a while need to focus on, even more so than ever before, developing an understanding of the federal partners in terms of those individuals within the different offices, the staff, develop relationships between staff, regional office staff, working on specific plans, specific issues, and ASMFC staff. I know what happens now, and Tony's done a good job with that. Of course, Bob Beal has done a good job with that, but there needs to be more of a focus on that. I see that once that acknowledgement of the other's existence and the importance of the other occurs, then you get that exchange, you get that cooperation, you get a willingness to listen more so than ever before. There's no substitute for staff interaction to assist the decision makers when we come here and at other times. That's my suggestion. If we want to increase cooperation, we have to make sure we have that continued communication with the other groups, with our federal partners, and that means that we should take the initiative to communicate with them before they communicate with us, just to get that going. I've seen that happen on issues specific to New England, where my agency, this is, I guess, every agency around the table does this, know who the players are, and when you know who the players are, things can get done. Corners can be cut, not inappropriately, but in an appropriate way. Corners can be cut, and timely actions can be taken. Paperwork can be cut down, and we get some end results that are of benefit to ASMFC and also to our federal partners.
Mr. Lustig?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Looking at the graph, I am focused on the low numbers for 2010 and 2013. I had just started my tenure with the Commission at 2010, so I can't comment about that, but the 2013 date, I believe, in response to what Tom brought up, I believe that was the year that we were discussing the Endangered Species Act and sturgeon and the implications of unfunded mandates. And boy, I was really intrigued with the impassioned pleas that came from the tables here, and sometimes I thought it was falling on deaf ears, and so thus the low scores there. I certainly can honor what Dr. Pierce just said about cooperation, and hopefully there's real good listening that is done both ways and good cooperation in the future. Thank you.
Mr. Adler?
Yes, generally, I'm agreeing with Tom Foti on this particular thing on cooperation with regard to how we do management issues, and then the councils and NOAA do their thing. And over the years, I've seen where they've come out with different numbers, and it's always been that we have to reconsider, not them reconsidering their decision. And that has always got to me. And it's along those lines of cooperation where it seems like we don't have the force that if the ISFMP speaks, the federal councils have to, and NOAA, have to consider what we said as important, very important, and maybe adjust their way of thinking more towards us. And so that's what's always been egging at me. Thank you.
Thank you. We're going to move on to the next item. Thank you for your comments.
Scroll to the next one, Melissa. This constituents one slide down. So in the survey, in the other comments or the open-ended suggestions, there were suggestions on some improved outreach materials, ISFMP materials, whether that be webinars or better decision documents and documents with clear statements of the problem. And I think that staff can work together to provide some of that information and make some changes to how we're providing information to you all, and as well as the public, to help with our relationships with our constituents and providing information to improve decision making there. Unless there's additional suggestions, we can work with what was in the survey.
Mr. Adler?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Tony, better decision documents. Any idea what that means, making it a better decision document than what you already give us?
So I think we don't always do these decision trees, is what we've been sort of calling them, when we have FMPs that we're making changes to, either addendums or amendments, sort of providing a one-pager or a couple-pager so that you can clearly see what decisions you're making if you have to go on to a different, if you have a decision that's dependent on the decision beforehand, those types of decision trees, and we don't always do them. And the ISFMP staff has been brainstorming about ways to improve those for the past couple of months. And so in August, where we have several FMPs that will be taking final action on, you'll be seeing some new decision trees to help improve those. And those come to the meeting so the public can see them as well.
Thank you. Tom?
It's interesting. This is one of the areas that I basically, when I go to talk about public hearings, I always point out as the best example is what we do at the Atlantic States Marine Fisheries Commission. Because you make the hearings at night, we provide information, we answer questions during the presentation about the science and what's going on, and then we give an opportunity for comments. And, you know, I'm used to going to the Army Corps of Engineer hearings where you don't get any of that, or the Department of Interior, which has gotten worse over the years. So I always point out that they should be conducting their hearings the same way that we do, because I think it's a highlight of how we do things right. The problem we're running into, and I think this is a problem with the internet and what people rely on, is that when I used to have striped bass hearings in New Jersey, and this last time I thought I would have, you know, the same type of relationships. I mean, we at one point had 3 hearings, one with 900 people, 750, and the small hearing had 550, where now we're lucky to get 50 people, or the summer flounder hearing, which was important, we're lucky to get 15 people, and most of the states are seeing the same problem. So I think we got to figure out how we do this in the new age a little differently, maybe. We were talking about doing an app, and somebody told me that, and I said, well, apps don't work on my flip phone, but everybody else seems to have a smartphone. So that's one of the problems. But I think what we do as far as hearings and scoping meetings are a fine example how it's done right.
All right, thank you. Next.
So then I think we've already talked about fiscal resources, so we can go down to just the last one, and I don't know how much of an extensive discussion we can have, but if commissioners have ideas for ways that we can help move us forward in ending overfishing as well as our ability to manage overfish stocks. We're here to hear your suggestions over time. Give Pat or I a call, Bob a call.
No comments on this one? Tom?
I guess I'm going to speak it of move this morning. When I look at overfishing, it's gotten strange definition of what's overfishing. We got species like summer flounder, scub, and sea bass that are not supposed to be overfished, and overfishing is not taking place. We're fishing at some of the lowest quotas we've ever fished on those stocks, and we don't seem to be doing, as far as our constituents are doing them any good, we seem to be doing worse on that, but those are jointly managed plan. Some of the species that we look at, like weakfish, I mean, I just rip whatever few hairs I have left out on weakfish because I think we did everything right, and I don't know, there was other reasons that basically went down the tubes, and I'm still trying to figure that one out, and I think a bunch of us around the table are still figuring out. We blamed it on some unforeseen mortality, but I think we do a good job of trying to rebuild the stocks. The problem is when we get to that point, how do we handle some of those stocks? So I don't really think the Commission's having the problem of ending overfishing. We've done that on where we can. I mean, some species like sturgeon, things are going to take us a long time. Some species like shad and river herring, it's a lot of other reasons besides out fishing. There's not much more we can do, put in a moratorium. I mean, we're trying to rebuild the stock, so I don't see that the same problem I see other issues.
Well, that's kind of it. I mean, I feel like this exercise, I mean, are we getting what we need out of this exercise? If we can go back to that, no, there it is, back up now. I mean, those are pretty significant issues, particularly the last one. I can't quite figure that one out because I mean, just from my own personal opinion, I feel like our documents are models, and certainly the products that we're getting. I think we definitely, folks that ranked that, where'd it go now? The folks that ranked that so low, it's your responsibility to let us know, let leadership of the Commission know what the concerns are there, because that's the most alarming result from my perspective, because I just don't see it from what I review and progress. So please take the time to talk with Tony and Bob and provide them with some constructive feedback on what that means. I think that's important. The other ones are tough, I mean, because there are a lot of issues that are going on that we can't really control. And so somehow we need to get to the questions that get to that point. I mean, I think I can answer your question, Tom, on weakfish, that there's a population south of Hatteras. I wish I could prove it, but I can prove it by telling you that, the catch per unit effort, on the dock at my office is about 50 fish an hour per person at 16 to 20 inches. But I can't, but I'm still at a one fish bag limit, but so there's a lot of frustration out there for that. So how do we address them? And that's tough. And I think we're looking at Menhaden, the decisions we made yesterday. When was the last time we had a positive article from Saving Seafood and Pew on the same vote? That's pretty dang good. I mean, so I think we're moving in that direction pretty favorably. So I think we need to spend a little more time thinking about these three things and providing our feedback and input to the commission staff, if that's your pleasure. So, Mr. Vice Chairman, Doug.
Well, this was one of the new questions. Originally, I was discussing this with Tony. It was asked, how are we making progress on rebuilding stocks? And I felt it was more important that we get at, are we ending overfishing? Because we have some stocks that we have ended overfishing on, but they're not rebuilding for whatever reason. And so I'm just hoping that the commissioners, when they looked at this, that they took it into consideration. For example, winter flounder in southern New England is at very low levels, but we've ended overfishing in that. Same thing with southern New England lobsters. We've reduced the exploitation level down to very low levels so that we're technically not overfishing, but we have not rebuilt that stock at all. But we've taken these actions that have affected, as Tom has said, we've cut fishing mortality on a lot of stocks drastically here to try and end overfishing here. So personally, I gave us a fairly good score on this, but I just want to make sure that people aren't confusing overfished, which is the abundance levels have not gone up, with overfishing. And maybe it was clear in that in the questionnaire here what the difference was, but and I'll be interested to see how this comes out in the future years.
Richie?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think overall the survey is worthwhile and we should continue to do it. I guess I would just caution us to not look at these numbers through too fine a lens. I think we can get wrapped around, a small point change when the variables of the difference in the amount of commissioners answering it, the change in commissioners, I think a lot of that can account for, the small up and downs that we're seeing. And I think it's more important to look at the, 5, 6, 8-year trend in these questions. But from that standpoint, I think it's well worth that we continue to do this.
Thank you, Richie. Mr. Clark.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. If I'm not mistaken, this was one of those surveys where you chose a dot right on a spectrum of, and I think like most people, a lot of times you're kind of like, well, I don't want to put that top dot on there or something. So, I mean, a lot of those, like that one graph you had where we went from a 7.9 to a 7.5, what does that really even mean? I was just wondering, have you thought, I know it would be tough to change the survey design, but maybe one of those ones where you have like statements and you choose which statement you agree with rather than just try to rank it, because I think what you tend to get with these type of surveys is you tend to get 7 to 8 in that range on a lot of answers, and then it becomes hard to interpret.
I think so. Pat?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We haven't talked about cormorants and seals. to help end overfishing. So I'm wondering, I'd like to think outside the box. It's kind of a federal issue, and people don't want to talk about it because they like seals and they apparently like cormorants. I had a conversation with the director of Audubon from New York City, and I suggested to her that we should try to control the cormorants, and we did do that. I think Jim may have been involved with it up at Lake Ontario when they had pretty much taken over, wiping out everything from perch to striped bass to perch to bass, to anything in sight. The cormorants were populated to a point where they had taken over several of the small islands called the Galoos, which used to be a gray granite, which then turned out to be a white crap, if you will. So they put together an order with Fish and Wildlife to take out a number of those through oiling of eggs and so on. And I know it's a federal issue, and they're both protected. I think cormorants since 1976. And to make a long story short, the group were successful up in Lake Ontario to oil and eliminate many, many pairs of cormorants to bring them back into control. And lo and behold, all of those fish populations came back relatively well, very successfully in a matter of years. And if you wanted to hear about the success of that, you could probably have Jim tell you about that. But it seems to me both those animals have been protected for such a long time. The director from the Audubon group said, "Gee, if you're going to kill them, we'll help you. But you can't have our name on the contract." And she was referring to the fact that the shore bird, the walking bird population in and around New York has been very, very much threatened. And those numbers are down 75 to 80% of their historic levels by virtue of the cormorant population having taken over their areas. So in a very serious vein, if there was some way that maybe we, the states, could start a movement in the direction of getting cormorants unlisted, because of the magnitude of the population now, maybe, just maybe, we could reduce some of the mortality rate that they're creating. Seals are another story. People want to pet them and make them feel good until they get on your boat and rip it up, and then it's another story. But you know, two birds and animals that are continuing to really wipe out our winter flounder population in particular. I'm not sure about the weakfish. That'd be down to your area. You could talk about that. But both of them are really affecting the environment. And we've been led to believe in New York that the gray seals have moved down along the coastline, and summer habitat now taken over the area off of Block Island. So we'll put it on the record, and you'll hear me say this again, but I wonder if ISFMP would be bold enough to start a movement to get either one or the other unlisted so we can put some control on them. Seals, I thought we could actually package them up and send them to Africa or somewhere, use them for food. Cormorants, I thought they would be good, but they're very oily and greasy, and their feathers might be good for new pillows, but having said that, I'll stop.
I do not want a cormorant pillow. That ain't gonna happen. They would be awesome target practice, though, when you're getting ready to go duck hunting. You know, and I can assure you that we could take care of plenty of cormorants in Core Sound. Unbelievable. Dave Borden.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You know, Pat's always a difficult act to follow. You know, maybe we could process some of these for fish sandwiches. But I mean, on a serious note, what Pat's characterizing is actually a very serious problem in terms of colony nesting birds. And what I'm referring to there, so everyone's clear, is birds like glossy ibis, which nest in trees. And what happens is the cormorants, basically having had responsibility for this formally in Rhode Island, cormorants would take over an island that was a colony colony nesting site. And after a while, they use it for a nesting site also, which is fine as long as their density doesn't get too great. But when the density gets great, they produce so much guano on the island they kill the trees off and destroy the nesting habitat. So my only suggestion here is I think this warrants a dialogue, and it might be a good idea to have the chair put together a small committee to meet with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service staff, some NIMS staff, and appropriate other organizations, and try to figure out a coordinated policy. I'd also note, for the record, this is a transboundary species that goes up to Canada, and it receives no protection up there as far as I know. Thank you.
Call it the guano group. I think that's, I mean, I've heard it my whole career, and it just the problem seems to becoming worse and worse, and the research that's done and the amount of fish that are consumed by these huge populations certainly have to have a significant effect. And some people want to just say, well, that's natural mortality. Well, it's severely expanded natural mortality. So if anyone is interested in sitting on a group like that, see me after the meeting, and I'll put something together so we can maybe get the assistance from our Fish and Wildlife Service partner too, and try to see what our options are moving forward with that. Any further comments on this survey? It sounds like it will be continue to be a work in progress, but if it's seen as useful, I think we should continue it. I agree with Richie's comments primarily that it is, and I think John as well, that it's hard to discern trends, but we do know what a lot of us are thinking and what we're saying around the table, and so it does tend to match up a little bit with some of the concerns that we hear, except for that last one. I still haven't heard those comments, and I'm concerned about those. But certainly I think we need to try to keep some of these things in mind, and maybe staff can remind us when we're getting ready to make a decision, maybe remind the chairman of the committee, hey, this is inconsistent with what you said you wanted to improve in your surveys. And maybe that would light us up a little bit, maybe not, but don't get angry with the staff for reminding you of what you said you wanted us to do. So next item on the agenda is a review and approval of stock status definitions. We have beat this to death, and the cat is about as flat as it's going to get. We either going to have these definitions or we're just going to punt. So please, no more wordsmithing of these. I mean, unless it's just absolutely the most critical thing that you're not going to be able to sleep tonight unless you say something, please, let's get I think the staff has done a great job, and they have admonished me, no wordsmithing of these things anymore. And I kind of agree with them. I had a couple of suggestions, but I wouldn't make them now for love nor money. So with that introduction, Tony, would you like to take us through the definition?
Well, thank you, Louis. So these definitions, you've seen them before. Staff made the suggested changes from the August and October meeting. We pushed this off of the agenda from February due to the time constraints of the meeting. Would you like me to read the definitions? I don't need to. Yep. So we have definitions now that are one and the same for rebuilt and sustainable, recovering and rebuilding, the unknown, depleted, and species of concern. Next slide, Melissa. I won't even give you time to wordsmith because I'll just go through them. We also have definitions for overfished and overfishing, stable, unchanged, and a definition for a stock assessment update. And some of these, we just pulled definitions. As a reminder, we use these definitions in many different commission products. We want to have consistent definitions in all of our products so we would use them for all of them. And then lastly, Kelly Dennett had let the board know back in October that there would be proposed guidelines coming out in National Standard 1 for depleted stocks. Those guidelines are out still as proposed. A depleted stock is a stock whose biomass has declined as a result of habitat and other environmental conditions as opposed to fishing pressure, which is similar to our definition, which says a depleted stock reflects low levels of abundance, though it's unclear whether fishing mortality is the primary cause for the reduced stock size. The National Standard 1 guidelines go on to give time frames, either it being a 2 generations or that the time frame for which it's supposed to rebuild has not happened, even though they have followed the catch levels that are associated in the FMP. So our definition is just a little bit more broad in general, but it's somewhat similar. And that's all I have.
Should we throw the first ones back up there?
Yeah, we can. Just approve the whole thing, that would be great.
Yeah, I'd like to get a motion to approve the whole thing, but I would like to make sure, though, that with all kidding aside, that everybody is comfortable and good with these. Pat?
You looking for a motion now?
Please.
Yeah, so move to approve the new stock definition. You want it as stock definitions, or you want, that's it? Move to approve.
If it's the pleasure of the board to do the whole document, would be great.
No, I couldn't find anything through it that would, I can play with words, we all can play with words, but indeed it's a well-developed document, well presented, and I would make a motion to accept as presented all the new stock definition.
Thank you. A motion by Mr. Augustine, second by Mr. Adler. Yes.
Thank you very much. I'm certainly not going to offer any changes to this at this point, but I did want to at least get on the record and possibly hear from some other commissioners. It struck me as we were going through Menhaden that with the decision that we made yesterday, we basically enacted a TAC for 2015 that had a 2% probability of exceeding overfishing. But we had a lot of conversation about the target level, and that was obviously a concern to a lot of commissioners. It's obviously been concern to a lot of the public. But what struck me as I was looking at the document is that we have no terms to describe our stocks relative to the target necessarily. And it's something that I think in the future, I'm certainly not proposing anything here now, but for the sake of telling the public something with these definitions, we could spin the Menhaden very differently. We could spin it as the TAC we came up with has a greater than 50% probability of exceeding the target, or we could spin it as it has a 2% probability of resulting in overfishing. And I think if you put either of those in words down on paper and people read them, they would have a very different viewpoint of what our actions said. So again, I don't think it's nothing's going to change here today, but I think it's something it would behoove this commission to consider moving forward, how we express that. I think it's important to the public. I think it's important. It goes back to the constituent conversation we had a couple minutes ago and the perception of our actions here. Thank you.
Good. Thank you, Adam. Other comments? I wish I knew how to address that, because I agree with you. It's a difficult task, and I think a lot of that's done in the individual plans. But it's a tough definition sometimes, and there's a continuum there that's hard to pinpoint sometimes. But good comments, thank you. All right, seeing no other discussion, is there any objection to the motion? Seeing none, that motion carries unanimously. Thank you very much. Next up, we will discuss the Assessment Science Committee report, and this is an action item to update the stock assessment schedule, so Shanna will handle that for us.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The Assessment Science Committee recently met during its spring meeting in April 2015, and so we just have a couple of recommendations that we wanted to bring before the board to be approved. So to start, we have two quick changes to make to the TC guidance document. The first one is a clarification on the timing for alternate analysis submission for a benchmark assessment, and the second one is a addition of a fisheries independent data use policy, and I'll run through the two of these for you. So firstly, right now, members of the public wishing to submit an alternate analysis for stock assessment must submit the analysis at least 1 month prior to the workshop. And the reason being is that this gives the stock assessment subcommittee some time to evaluate these analyses and determine their applicability. Now, recently, some of our assessments have required more than one assessment workshop. So we have encountered sometimes where there have been requests for alternate analysis submission at a supplemental assessment workshop. This could be an issue if the stock assessment subcommittee members have already come to consensus on a model and then are brought forward with another model that they need to take time to review. So the Assessment Science Committee reviewed this policy and would like to recommend that the alternate analyses be submitted before the first assessment workshop. And this should hopefully provide sufficient time for stock assessment subcommittees to review any alternate analyses. We've added just a little bit of additional language to the TC guidance document, and I have that pulled up here. The assessment workshop section of the TC guidance document was actually in your policy board meeting materials, and the additional language that we crafted is highlighted. So basically we just made a change to one sentence in the document. So now the sentence will read, for analyses to be considered for the assessment, the analyses must be sent in the required format with accompanying methods, descriptions to the Commission at least 1 month prior to the first assessment workshop to allow for consideration at the workshop and any subsequent workshops. So that's just one of the changes that we suggested being made, and we will discuss that at the end of this presentation. The second thing that we wanted to add to the TC guidance document is a fisheries independent data use policy. So currently, if anyone outside of the stock assessment subcommittee requests raw data from assessments, the Commission will refer them to will refer the requesters back to the data providers. Essentially, this was just an unwritten rule that we had, and this will provide a formalized policy to kind of alleviate providers' concerns with their data being utilized outside of the Commission's stock assessment reports. The data use policy is designed to clarify how data will be used during and after the assessments to inform fisheries management decisions while making sure to protect the rights of data providers. The ASC reviewed this document, which can also be found in your meeting materials, and we recommended having this integrated into the TC guidance document as well. I know this is a little bit small, but this is also in your meeting materials if you guys want to run through it there. First of all, I'll start off with some of the changes that the ASC recommended to the stock assessment schedule. First of all, the Shad and River Herring Technical Committee has requested a Shad stock assessment update for 2017. Reason being that it's been 10 years since the last assessment with no updates, and they recommend a review of the status and trends. The TC did say that when they begin data collection in 2017, they will evaluate if enough new data has been accumulated to warrant a benchmark in place of an update. So the time frame may need to be adjusted if a benchmark is necessary. The ASC agreed with the TC recommendation and placed that on the stock assessment schedule for 2017. The shad and river herring TC also suggested a river herring assessment update in 5 years and a benchmark in 10 years after their last assessment. So the ASC agreed with the TC recommendations and added an update for 2018. So those were the two changes that we had to the assessment schedule. And then I'm just going to run through and keep you guys in the loop on what we have coming up. Striped bass will go through an update this year to get their stock status through 2014. I know we talked about that yesterday. Bluefish and scup both had an assessment workshop last month, and they will be reviewed through the SARC process in June of this year. Lobster's final stock assessment subcommittee meeting was last week. They are scheduled for their review on the second week of June. Red drum is on the schedule for a CDAR review in August of this year. Weakfish currently has an assessment workshop planned for early this summer, and they will go through an ISFMP external review this fall. Black sea bass had a data workshop, will have a data workshop in June. Their planned assessment workshop will be in September and October, with their assessment review planned for March 2016 as an ISFMP external review. For spot and croaker, both assessments will be on the same schedule since there'll be a lot of overlap in the people who are working on them as well as the data sources. And they will have a CDAR review in August 2016. And those are all of the updates that we had to the schedule. And I just wanted to finish the presentation keeping you guys abreast of our stock assessment training program. The ASC discussed getting our stock assessment training program back up and running. We've created a survey to get input from ASC members as well as our past participants and any supervisors so they can let us know what they would like to have their staff focusing on. We will be giving an advanced course and an introductory and intermediate course, and the results to that survey should be coming soon. I just closed the surveys last week, and it should let us know what topics people would like to see in our upcoming training series. So with that, I will take any questions, and we can discuss the changes that we have to the TC guidance document as well as the assessment schedule.
Pat? Boy, am I glad to be back. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. If you flip back to your list of all of the stocks that we manage, that one, and good report, thank you very much. Of the species that are listed up there that we have done nothing with in 10 or 15 years, it looks like there's one, two, three, maybe five. So there are two questions. One is, are we ever going to do anything with them, or do we just carry responsibility for them? And if we aren't in the next, pick a number, 5 years, why don't we take them off the list, off the main list, and put them down at the bottom and bracket them as, whether you want to call them species of concern or whatever, but we're not doing anything with them. And when that chart goes out to the public, every time I make a presentation, I get asked questions. What are you doing with these? And really, I think it takes away from the value added of what this body does in terms of stock assessments and so on. So I'd like to get the opinion of other board members relative to that. And look at the charts, and there are 4 or 5 we do nothing with, but they're there and we are accountable for. So anyone interested in moving those down to a place where they're encapsulated together, so all the good work shown at the top, and these are things that are still being considered, I think it's a home run for us if we consider doing that.
I like home runs. Would you like to comment?
Yeah, Pat, I guess I'm not seeing what you're seeing. I see spotted sea trout is the only one that doesn't have anything on there. Spot is going to be done in 2016, something we haven't done in a while. We haven't done in the past. So we got that on there. The other one's sturgeon, and we've got that in 2017. So the only one I see where we haven't done anything on this chart and don't have something scheduled is spotted sea trout. Is that, you were talking about 5 of them, and I'm just not seeing that.
From here, it looks like more. Okay, maybe it's just a one, so then we'll ask the question, the follow-on question, is there going to be something done with that in the next few years?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. With sea trout specifically, in the last 2 or 3 years, we did not attempt a coast-wide assessment, but the individual states in the South Atlantic did meet and look at the available data and move forward on, again, individual state-specific assessments or analysis of trends, but again decided that there was no need to do a regional or coast-wide assessment for sea trout.
Then a final question on, we had talked about trying to get the sturgeon delisted. As you had said, Dr. Daniel, it had an effect on you for what permits you had to get in the last couple of years and how many millions of dollars it was costing you to do those. Has ASFMP moved forward any further than looking at trying to get sturgeon delisted? Or we have a plan to do something after the stock assessment is completed, directly after that?
I certainly hope so. Unfortunately, it's taken us quite a bit longer to do the stock assessment than I expected. But it's soon, depending upon the results of the assessment, will that give us the juice that we need to try to petition to have them delisted? I think that's everyone's intent. I believe it still is. But it is going to set an interesting precedent when we start battling ESA issues based on stock assessment results. That makes me nervous, and it should make especially folks interested in winter flounder and some of these things that are very low biomass levels nervous as well. One point that I hate to even bring up on the record, but I will. I do have some pretty significant concerns about having spotted sea trout on the list. And while I recognize that it's a hugely important fish to the South Atlantic, up to Virginia at least. The problem is, though, and I don't know if other states are finding this to be the case, but we're starting to have folks look at instances where we're more restrictive than federal rules. And while we're not a federal agency, we're seen as a federal agency by a lot of people. And the fact that all we require in our FMP for speckled trout to be in compliance is a 12-inch minimum size limit, it could really cause some problems, particularly for the Virginia, North Carolina stock, if it was said that by implementing the rules and regulations that we have in place, which are very complex for speckled trout, we're being far more restrictive than the plan requires. And so, do we really need it in the hopper at all? And that's a question I think for the South Atlantic Board to discuss first and foremost. But it is starting to create some issues. That specific plan, and I'm unaware of any other plan that has that type of problem associated with it. Emerson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The issue with people submitting alternative models between stock assessment workshops, if there's more than one workshop, is how problematic is that? I mean, what's triggered this?
We've only had it come up a couple of times. Essentially, the problem is if we have multiple assessment workshops, usually at the first assessment workshop, they go through, they look at all of the models that they have on the table, and if we have something that is an alternate model, we can discuss it then. But if they're going to have subsequent assessment workshops, by that point, they've usually already come to consensus on a model. And so we're already moving forward with a model and working through it. And so if we have someone coming in after we've already come to consensus, that could pose a problem.
Follow-up, Emerson?
Yes. Yeah, I understand the process, and I've participated in it a few times. So you just outlined the process to me. I understand that. I guess my question is, how frequently does it happen where there's more than one stock assessment workshop, and in the period between the first and the subsequent workshop, somebody comes along and submits an alternative model?
We've only had it happen once so far.
But we want to make it very clear to the public how to participate in our process and how to be a part of it. And so we want to make sure that there are very clear and specific guidelines on how to do so. And so that's why we're proposing the change, so that it's understandable where we're supposed to be bringing these things forward. Because if, as Shanna said, it comes in the middle, Lobster had 3 or 4 modeling workshops. And if someone came at the very last model workshop because our guidelines aren't very clear, that they wanted to bring this whole new model for the committee to consider, but they're finalizing their report in 3 weeks, then that's not it's not very transparent to the public that, they should have come 4 months ago. And so we want to make sure that we're being very transparent to the public of how to participate in our process. It's not that we're trying to prevent them from participating, it's that we want them to come in at the right times.
Mr. Adler?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just want to ask one clarification of the report. You said the second Lobster was going to have the second week in June a review. Is that the peer review of the? Is that what that is?
Yes.
Because then it's coming back to the board here, I guess, in August, I think. So
that's correct.
What you talked about was a peer review.
Yes, that'll be the peer review.
Thank you.
Any other questions? I think we need a motion to... I'm sorry. I didn't see you there, Dave.
No, that's right. It's late. Debating whether or not to bring it up now. So, independent of the agency, the University of Connecticut applied for and received Sea Grant funding to do a stock assessment for tautog in Long Island Sound, and they've been talking with the technical committee all along. So they're well aware of it. I think they'll be here later today and tomorrow to get to know the commission process and the people a little better. So I'm wondering, and they already have a postdoc on board to do the assessment. So I'm wondering, in terms of the update schedule for 2016, how the tautog board could consider the products of this next assessment, when we might be able to entertain a look at it, and how it might fit into this schedule. I mean, is this something we do need to talk about now, or can we talk about it next year for planning purposes?
I think that's something that would be brought up on the next ASC call. If you guys are already in contact with the TC, your TC member would be able to bring that up on the ASC call and let us know where they would like to have that place on the schedule. Assessment Science Committee, ASC.
Okay, so a technical committee member, because it's not the ASC is a subset or a complementary group. We might not have membership on the ASC. I don't think we do. For example, Jay McNamee is intimately familiar with the work that they're doing. They seem to be in communication a lot. I'm not sure what his relationship is with UConn, but there is one there. So he's certainly aware of what they're doing.
Yeah, the ASC member who I guess would be closest tied to TOG would be Jeff Brust, so I can get in contact with him.
Dave?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This will just be brief. Can somebody remind me what the policy is relative to releasing a stock assessment? At what point does a finalized stock assessment actually get released to the public? Is that prior? Is it made, for instance, available before the peer review? Is that the way it works?
The stock assessment will be released to the public after the board gets a chance to review it, and it's approved by the board.
Okay, so I guess that at least raises a question in my own mind. The peer reviews, as I understand it, are available to the public. I mean, they can go attend and listen, and And at that stage, the board hasn't reviewed the document. So I'm just wondering, it's almost like a little disconnect in terms of, I would think that somehow we'd make the stock assessment available at the point where we schedule a peer review so that people go into the peer review informed. They've had an opportunity to actually read the document. But maybe I don't understand what we're doing.
There are a couple of steps there. I mean, we have a transparent process, and so just like the stock assessment workshops, the peer review workshop is also open to the public. And so anyone that wishes to attend will, receive the results or observe the presentations through the peer review workshop. I will note that in our technical guidelines and benchmark process, the board chair for the stock is welcome to come and made aware of the review workshop, so they can participate at that time. But because it's a public open process, anyone can be aware of those results. I will clarify that throughout the process, the development of a stock assessment, including at the peer review, at the opening of those workshops, we state to everyone, this is still considered draft. Changes may still be made. You're going to see results of modeling for a given stock, but consider these, not the final results until they go to the board for approval.
A quick follow-up, Mr. Chairman. I'm making a slightly different point that I totally approve of the way it's being handled, the way it was just characterized, very transparent and open. I'm a little bit more concerned about the issue of the public going to a peer review and not having had the opportunity to at least read the draft that the peer reviewer is going to read. It seems to me that at the point that you schedule the peer review, the document should be available electronically, and then if members of the public are there and want to avail themselves of the document, read it, and go make comments within the confines of the commission rules, they should be allowed to do that. But that's my own opinion. Thank you.
Pat? Please.
Ready for a motion?
Sure.
Okay. Would you like to have a common motion for both, Mr. Chairman?
Please.
Okay. Move to approve the fishery independent data use policy and the revised stock assessment schedule as presented.
How about this, Pat? Just move to approve the fishery independent data policy changes.
No. TC guidance.
Okay, maybe you did or did it then.
If instead of saying approve the fishery independent data policy, we could say approve changes to the TC guidance document, because the fishery independent data policy would be an appendix of the TC guidance document, and we also did have that one line change in the actual guidance document.
So move. Yes, please make the change accordingly.
So I believe, and staff will correct me if I misspeak, that what we're approving is the 1 month language change, the data policy guideline, which basically says that if you want information from raw data from the stock assessment, they would send you to the state who has the data and not be giving it out out of ISFMP, and approve the revised schedule. That's what we're voting on. Is everybody clear? So are there any? We'll read it for the record. Move to approve the changes to the TC guidance document and assessment schedule as presented. Motion by Mr. Augustine, second by Mr. Adler. Comments on the motion? Seeing none, is there any objection to the motion? Seeing none, the motion carries. Thank you. Shannon, you can just keep on going if you're ready.
Well, I'm ready.
Okay.
You guys aren't getting rid of me yet. So I just wanted to briefly update you guys on our last SES meeting that we had in March of this year. As you remember, at winter meeting, we discussed the SES presenting some updates and changes to their role within the commission. The restructure of the SES was generally well received by the board, and the SES is moving forward with the plans that we had outlined in our revised guiding document that we went over back in February. The commissioners did express interest in expanding some of the socioeconomic sections and amendments and addenda with basic information and calculations. The SES reviewed this request, and they decided that they should be able to provide some of the information that the commissioners requested. However, they did want to express caution against depending on that information for making management decisions. They stressed that allocation decisions cannot be made on the data that we'll be presenting here, and much of the data necessary for allocation decisions is currently not collected. So as you remember, we went over with the SES restructure that SES would now be nominating members to serve on each ASMFC species technical committee or PDT, and this should be able to provide some technical support to the development of those socioeconomic sections of fisheries management plans. So some of the suggestions that we proposed putting into amendments or addendum that would be a little bit quicker, easier, and could be graphical, we broke down into both the commercial and the recreational sectors. Some of the brainstormed ideas were making sure that we include things like ex-vessel value overall by gear and by sector, also regionally and by state, and we could also include crew size. We also were going to include participation in these sections as well as reliance on other fisheries or species. All of these things we hope to be able to provide in either 10, 5, or 3-year trends. And then at the end of these sections, we would go and have a short discussion on the most recent year of data. We also brainstormed a few data sources that we could pull from while compiling this data. We can go through state data. ACCSP also provides some of this information, as does the National Marine Fisheries Service. For recreational data, we said that we could probably provide effort by mode. We would definitely do this in a 10, 5, and 3-year trend, and again, end the discussion with the most recent year of data. We would also be able to discuss the trends in directed trips, whether the species were caught or were targeted, and we would go through changes in discards versus harvest. The data source for this would be the MRIP program. So the conclusion was from the committee that a lot of these basic trends could be included into upcoming amendments and addenda when we have that data available. Again, a lot of times these things are patchy, and so it would take time for the committee to go through and make sure that they have a clear trend to be able to provide within the FMPs. SES would like to continue to inform the commissioners on more comprehensive data collection programs and comprehensive analyses that would actually fully describe a lot of the socioeconomic implications of management measures. And we would also want to continue our educational workshops like we had last year and provide reports to the policy board. And so with that, I would be happy to take any questions.
Dr. Pierce?
In your slide that showed the commercial fisheries and the information that you believe would be available for our use, you say, and let's see, reliance on other fisheries and species. To me, that's an extremely important part of any evaluation of what we do, consequences of what we do. The question is, you really can't provide that information?
this is extremely difficult and hard information to come by. If you can give it to us, it'll go a long way towards helping us. So you're confident, you and those with whom you've worked with to assemble this, you're confident you can actually provide us with that kind of a perspective, reliance, the degree of reliance on these other fisheries and species?
Again, I think that a lot of the things that we have listed are brainstorms, and they're things that we want to be able to provide when we have that data available. We completely agree with you that that's something that would be very useful information when making management decisions. So it really depends on the depth of data that's being collected for that particular species that we would actually be able to provide that information.
Okay, thank you. And this gets to my point about cooperation with our federal counterparts and the importance of staff knowing who the players are, since much of this information is in the hands, in the files, and the computers of the National Marine Fisheries Service. So to provide this information, we're going to need that kind of cooperation, which I'm certain we'll get. So, well, thank you for that clarification.
Emerson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And my comment, my question was going to be very similar to the issue that Dave Pierce just raised. So a corollary to that as well is if we have, or if we can obtain information on reliance on other fisheries and species, I think it would be helpful and important to include, I'm going to say, a cumulative impact. You know, even though we manage these species individually, fishermen don't fish on just one species. And we may have taken an action in year one that has an impact, and then in year two, we're taking an action on another species, which is within the suite of other species, other fisheries or species. So I think it would be very helpful to commissioners as well as to the industry to have some estimate of what cumulative impact is or what it might be. Thank you.
That's good suggestion. John?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Can you go back, I think it was to the second slide, Shanna? I just wasn't really clear about one of the comments there. Yeah, it was caution against depending on information for management decision. What exactly do they mean there?
I think they were worried that if we provided things that were deemed as very straightforward graphical information, that they wouldn't want that used for making allocation decisions. The information that they would want to provide for making allocation decisions would be based on very significant, complex work. And I think that's what we brought forward at our last meeting in February, is that we hope to be able to continue to provide the Commission with areas of interest that we see, where we can start collecting more data, where we can hopefully start to contribute time to building RFPs and pulling in more information in order to be able to give you guys more in-depth information. So a lot of the ideas that we've laid out now are more quick things that we could provide during like an addenda process or an amendment process. Sure. But, we want to make sure that we continue to provide the best information that we can, and that we're not just giving you basic things.
Sure. Okay. And I just had one comment on the recreational. Was any thought given to, in light of all the complaints that were heard up and down the coast over striped bass about how charter boats were saying having a one-fish possession limit was going to kill their business? Just looking at something as simple as the number of charter boat licenses in the states before and after something like Addendum 4. I'm just curious, just because that was I know from the board meetings that we heard that complaint up and down, from many states about what that possession limit would do. Thanks.
I think that's a great suggestion, and I'll make sure that I bring it up on our next SES call.
I had parallax.
facts there. Pat?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Quick follow-on question. So when would you develop a sample of sorts as to what all of this would look like for the board to review at the annual meeting or something like that? Do you have a next step in the plan as to how the data would be presented?
I think it's hard to provide a sample because it would be different for every species depending on what data is available. So I think that one of the next things that I've been discussing with the ISFMP department is that TATOG, right, would probably be the next step in the process. So I would get one of the CES members, we're in the process right now of deciding who's assigned to which species and things like that. But we'll be working together to develop a segment for TATOG, I think, first.
Tom?
I've been looking at the number of trips that we've been down since 2007 in the Mid-Atlantic Bight area, recreational fishing trips, and that's private boats and shore-based anglers. And we've been down about 8 million trips. I know New Jersey alone is down 2 million trips. I know we pulled out the figures because I was looking at them for summer flounder. It'd be interesting to look at a table that would basically show species and the number of trips that are down for those directed trips in the last 5 years or the last 4 years. Because, 8 million trips in one area in the Mid-Atlantic Ridge is a lot of recreational trips that are not participating. It means a lot of money lost, and we should be trying to grab a handle on why those trips are dropping like that. And the only way we can do that is if we look at species, and that information can be tweaked out of MERS figures, as good as the MERS figures are. But that's another story. But anyway, we can take a look at what the information we have available. And I know John Borman did that for me, or Dave Voorhees did that for summer flounder, and I have it broken down by states, the drop number of trips, but that might be information good to give to the board so we realize that there's been a huge drop in the number of trips since 2007.
Good. Okay. Anybody else? I thought I saw another hand up over here on the right. On the left? Nothing further? Thank you, Shanna.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Board.
Winter flounder. Melissa, if you could put up the motion from the last policy board meeting. At the last policy board meeting, based on a recommendation from the winter flounder board, we moved to send a letter to the New England Fishery Management Council and NOAA Fisheries urging a reduction in the southern New England mass winter flounder possession limit to bycatch limits only for federal vessels based on sea sampling data for trips targeting other species. Staff went ahead and drafted a letter that reflected this motion as well as just overall cooperation and coordination between the Commission and Council as well as NOAA Fisheries in the regional office on winter flounder management and discussions and decisions. When we shared that letter with members of the policy board as well as members of the winter flounder board, there was concern about the specificity of the possession limits in the letter. So it was asked that we bring this back to the policy board, and at your discretion, Mr. Chairman, I'd like to pass it off to Bob Ballou, who had some thoughts on this.
Bob?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Tony. That was a very accurate characterization of the record. A rather prescriptive motion from the Winter Flounder Board that was brought before the Policy Board, a discussion that ensued, and a strong inclination on the part of the members of the Policy Board who spoke to the issue to rework the language a bit, and yet there was not a amended motion or new motion adopted by the policy board, so we were left with a sort of disconnect with this original motion, a subsequent discussion that was aimed at sort of tailoring the approach a bit, but no sort of final outcome, and that's what left the issue sort of in abeyance. So what I'd like to suggest is a motion that I think would put the issue in the place where it belongs, and I've already handed it to Melissa, so I'll just read it into the record, and that is to move that the Commission send a letter to the New England Fishery Management Council requesting the initiation of a broader dialogue on the co-management of southern New England mid-Atlantic winter flounder, with particular focus on achieving more consistency in the application of management measures in state and federal waters. I'll just make that my motion, and if there's a second, I can certainly go on to speak to it, but I, again, would just note that the record from our last policy board meeting reflects this sentiment, and I think this is consistent with what the policy board was intending to do. Thank you.
Second by Mr. Gilmore. Discussion on the motion. Dave Simpson.
Yeah, I thought the Winter Flounder Board was pretty clear in their feelings about this. I appreciate the points that Bob made. I think it was mostly Rhode Island that was equivocating a little bit on the specificity and maybe the severity of the recommendation. Go back to what you were doing before, or closer to what we're doing. But this is not my sense. I mean, it did pass, as I remember, unanimously, the previous motion that we have now. Unanimously at the TAUG board, unanimously at the policy board. I do recognize that there was a discussion about softening it a little bit, but you know, we've looked at our trawl survey indices. Winter flounder are in dire straits. There was a little bit of recovery for a couple of years when coincident with the moratorium in federal waters. Since the moratorium was lifted and directed fishing was allowed again, our indices are back down. And I don't mean a little bit. I mean, in our April survey, we caught 116 fish. For winter flounder, that's shocking. You know, we used to have an old gadfly, we'll call him, in Long Island Sound, who used to criticize everything we did. And at one point, about 5 or 10 years, probably 10 years ago, he petitioned NOAA to have winter flounder listed under the ESA. And I'm beginning to think that that's how close we're getting to a problem with winter flounder. I mean, there are no fish left in many areas of the Sound. Winter flounder was a species, we've been doing a survey for 32 years now, 97, 98% occurrence for 31 of those years. In the last 2 years, we're down to 69% occurrence. So we can't even find them in some locations anymore. The Nyack River is probably the most studied stock anywhere because of the North Millstone Nuclear Power Station. They've been monitoring that population for decades. We've gone from a stock of 50,000 fish in that little river down to dozens of fish. This is a resource that's being wiped out. It's facing the adversity of climate change, but it's at such a low stock level that our previous couple of winters that would normally provide favorable recruitment can't produce strong recruitment anymore. So I don't think we can be strong enough in our urging to the federal government to please do some conservation with winter flounder. Don't restart the clock and give yourself another 10 years, okay? This stock is in serious trouble. This is beyond chasing optimal yield. This is a stock that's in real trouble, and I think the Commission shares that sense with me. And this is not a time to talk about, you know, our fishermen need these fish. I mean, that kind of, to me, 1980s mentality, but they need these fish, is what got us into trouble with a lot of stocks. And This is one that's predominantly a state waters resource. It's spawning in our estuaries. I think there's a lot of state-level identification with this fish, and that the months they spend in federal waters, they have no protection anymore, and it's showing in our assessments of them. So I'm very concerned, and I think we need something stronger, much stronger than this as a signal, much more like what we agreed to 3 months ago.
Terry Stockwell.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. As someone who's going to be the recipient of whatever letter comes from this council, I just wanted to provide a little context to the way the council sets its trip limits, and the common pool trip limit is tied to a fixed amount of fish. So it's probably better for us not to argue about the trip limit, but to recommend that the council sets a lower mortality rate on the catch altogether. And to David's point, this year's assessment may well take care of that. It doesn't look very good.
Dave Pierce.
I share David's perspective on the status of the stock, and like Terry, I'll be the one who receives this correspondence, and I'll be talking to myself about, as a board member, what should I do? As a council member, what should I do? And I think as a board member, I would prefer to go in the direction that the Winter Flounder Board has already stated. That is, action definitely needs to be taken, something very aggressive. I appreciate the maker of the motion, Bob Ballou. However, initiating a broader dialogue with co-management will not necessarily result in an outcome that will be of benefit to the Southern New England, Mid-Atlantic, or Winter Flounder resource. Not at all. So, to give you an example as to what's going on with this particular stock, in the context of habitat management, the Omnibus Habitat Amendment of the New England Council, at our last meeting, we adopted a closure area to protect habitat that includes a rather large stretch of area in the Great South Channel area into which the stock goes, an area where the so-called channel flounder are caught. So those flounder will be off limits, but I suspect that at the next council meeting, there'll be an initiative, especially by the fishing industry that wants to catch this winter flounder, to change that council decision, to revise that decision, to open up those areas again for fishing on winter flounder. So there still is this mindset that winter flounder, Southern New England, Mid-Atlantic winter flounder should be targeted, can be targeted, and I don't think it should be, not to the extent that it has been or might be in the near future. So I can't support this motion. I would prefer to support the other motion, although at the same time, Terry also makes a great point about perhaps the need for us to recommend something that would relate to a lower F target, and maybe the stock assessment that will eventually be brought forward will kind of put this issue to rest. But in the meantime, we have to act, and this is the motion that I don't want to support.
Dave Borden.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think, as everybody knows, I've spoken on this issue at, I think, 3 prior committee meetings on this, and I would align my thinking completely with what David Simpson said. I think this is the whole system is setting itself up for failure unless we address this right up front. I'd point out that in our charter, and this is only a sentence in our charter, it says, coordination with regional fishery management councils. Each management board shall work with the appropriate committees of the regional fishery management councils, appropriate federal officials, to ensure state and federal fishery management programs are coordinated, consistent, and complementary. We're not doing that, plain and simple. In order to have coordinated programs, you need a dialogue. The two parties have to sit down and discuss the rules and the goals and objectives in order to have complementary regulations, which we do not have. The Commission is managing this stock as a depleted stock with a bycatch limit. The Council, because of the Magnuson requirements, when you can't rebuild within 10 years, it basically has extended the rebuilding timeline for another 10 years, and then managed it with a constant catch scenario and certain recruitment assumptions. And the long and short of that is that if those recruitment assumptions are wrong, and I think you're hearing some testimony from a state official here that they probably are wrong, then we're just setting ourselves up for failure. So I can, in my own case, I can support the motion. I would be happier if the motion ended with a sentence that requested that a subcommittee meeting be set up between the Council officials and representatives of the Commission, including the National Marine Fisheries Service, to bring this to a head and basically end up with a coordinated program. So I think that's what needs to be done. Thank you.
Brandon, y'all are in a bad spot over there to see your hands.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think in any letter that we send, I think the more specific you can be, I think the better the letter is. And I think the original motion by the Winter Flounder Board is pretty specific, and I think there was an intent behind it being so specific because of our concerns. I mean, I certainly think that letter can also indicate that the Winter Flounder Board would like to, encourage greater dialogue between between the two management agencies, but I think it needs to contain the specific language that the original Winter Flounder Board agreed to. I just think it's a lot clearer. This is a little bit nebulous in terms of what may happen and what the outcome might be. It's pretty clear what the Winter Flounder Board is asking, and I think we should send a letter to that effect. Thanks.
Tom?
I think the letter also should go to the regional director, since he has to approve what the New England Council does, and we're asking them not to approve what they're doing the last time. So I think it should be pretty clear that we send it to the regional director for GROPA.
Bob?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I do appreciate the comments that have been offered, and I just want to make it clear that the issue certainly for Rhode Island, and I think it might be true for others, is the disparity in possession limits that currently exists, and we're well aware of the issues, the operational assessment underway, which is very likely to show continued low abundance, and we're certainly not suggesting that there should be an increase in effort by any means. What we're suggesting is that there needs to be a more harmonization between the two management programs, the one being the ISFMP program for state waters, the other being the New England Council program for federal. So that was what we were trying to get at, or that's what I'm trying to get at here with this motion, is to try and step up the dialogue to at least achieve a more consistent approach aimed at addressing the issues that need to be addressed, whatever they may be, such that there isn't disparity in terms of how state water fishermen are treated versus federal. So I just want to clarify that that's really where we're coming from on this. It's not to disagree with the sentiments that have been expressed today. It's to rather focus on trying to step up the dialogue and with a particular view to addressing the disparity in possession limits. Thank you.
Pat.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would move to amend the motion, and I would like to call, if I may, Mr. Chairman, on Mr. Borden to restate his additional sentence that he wanted to put in there. I thought it was clear. What Mr. Ballou put up there, I think, is extremely important to set the stage, but I think Mr. Borden was trying to close the loop on the rest of that, so I will second what he says. So, and I don't remember exactly how he put it, but he was very articulate in how he presented. So if we could do that, Mr. Chairman, I'd appreciate it.
Yeah, and we can agree to do that without amending it if everybody agrees with Mr. I guess you're calling on Mr. Borden? Yes. Okay.
Yeah,
Would you like to speak, Mr. Moore?
Yeah, the only problem with this, Mr. Chairman, is I can't remember what I said.
Play back the tape.
Yeah, we might need a minute to wordsmith this.
David, I think that we can express in the letter that we would like to have a coordinated meeting with council, regional office staff, commission members, and even maybe technical individuals to discuss how we move forward with winter flounder management in a more coordinated way.
Yeah, I actually think the point that got Pat's attention is that we would just simply add a sentence to it that requests a subcommittee meeting between the commission and the council with GARFO and maybe even center personnel to move the discussion forward. That's all. If you want to.
Okay, we'll just do that if it's okay. Is that okay, Pat? Okay.
That's perfect. Thank you.
All righty. Uh-oh. Maybe not. I got, Lordy mercy. All right, hold on. Keep your hands up. Let's go with Roy, then Terry, then Dave, and then Dave. Dave Simpson, then Dave Pierce.
Mr. Chairman, I find myself in alignment with David Simpson and Brandon Muffley on this particular issue. I think that just pointing out that there needs to be better consistency is not a strong enough message. This is a stock that virtually disappeared from our area many years ago. My personal opinion is we'll never see any more winter flounder unless something is done drastically to increase or allow this species to re-inhabit its former range. And I think the message from the letter that we were considering sending at least highlighted the urgency with which we view this particular issue. And I'd like to see us recapture that urgency in our letter. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. Terry?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just timeline-wise, I mean, all the winter flounder stocks will be updated this year in September. So we really have an opportunity now to start the discussion of improved collaboration between the Commission and the Council. So whatever version of this letter goes out there, I mean, my suggestion would be to get a subset of the Winter Flounder Board and GARFO and the Groundfish Committee together at some point this year, and put a process in motion before the Council sets its specs in the fall for the next 3 years.
Dave Simpson?
Yeah, I think Terry made good points about the particulars of the motion that passed unanimously 3 months ago, and we can finesse that, but it seems clear to me that the board's sentiment is not, we need to start a dialogue and cooperatively manage. There needs to be added to that a sense of urgency about the status of this resource and our significant concerns about it. So this isn't just another species and another, allocation issue. This is the survival of an important species in state waters. So, I mean, again, that we caught 116 winter flounder. This is like you catch 116 bay anchovies. You start to panic. That is a very, very low number. This is a species that's ubiquitous, or supposed to be. Thousands every month we would take normally. And I have staff concerned about our policy of aging because that requires we kill the fish. That's how concerned our staff is about it. So this isn't about, better coordination of management. It needs to be a strong signal to the federal government that states have concerns about the viability of this population in the future, now and in the future.
I got 3 Daves in a row here. Hold on. Dave Pierce.
Yeah, perhaps this discussion has made me think that perhaps the motion could be simply stated as is, but with a particular focus on achieving, with a broader dialogue on the poor status of the winter flounder resource and co-management of the flounder. In other words, highlight the fact, as David Simpson just said, that we believe right now we have plenty of evidence that the status of the stock is very poor. All right, so we put it into the motion, we then pass this motion, and it's done in a way that precedes the winter flounder assessment that will eventually come out that will make our points that the status of the stock is very poor. With regard to the co-management, when we get into the co-management discussions, I suspect that the board, the winter flounder board, may actually say that we need to do with winter flounder what we've done with spiny dogfish, and that is the ASFMP should control the winter flounder fishery in the southern New England mid-Atlantic area, potentially through landing limits. We can. We do it with dogfish. If we believe that the status of the stock is as we suspect it is, and that the actions in federal waters by the New England Council, me and others, are insufficient, then we can implement landing limits that would constrain what is landed in our states, hence what is coming out of federal waters as well as state waters. Now, that might not be appreciated by some council members because it hasn't been appreciated with dogfish, but still, we can do it if we care to. It's an aggressive move on our part. It would make it very clear that we're very serious about this. So if this motion passes, perhaps with the change that I just suggested, then we could go down that road and have some very productive discussions, with ourselves and with our federal counterparts to do something meaningful for this flounder resource that is indeed in very, very serious shape. So I could make that suggested change to the motion, Mr. Chairman, if you would like. I would demand requesting the initiation of a broader dialogue on the co-management of southern New England mid-Atlantic winter flounder with a particular focus on the poor status of the stock and on achieving more consistency, and it goes on from there. So just to put it in there so there's a clear understanding as to why we want this focus of consistency.
Is that a friendly change? So we'll do it. It's nice not to have a dog in this fight, for once. But we're actually seeing more sturgeon than you're seeing winter flounder. A lot more sturgeon than you're seeing winter flounder. I mean, we're seeing them every day. We're observing them daily in North Carolina. You could be in a real scrape, New England Council. And, from my perspective, you need to hold NIMP's feet to the fire if they even think about listing them. And they're the problem. That's going to really be a mess. So my only question is have we done enough? Have we done enough at the commission level that we could, if we needed to take emergency action, we could? And would that be something that the New England Council could consider to take some action right away? Those are just thoughts. But we're seeing more sturgeon than you're seeing winter flounder. So that should raise some red flags. I'm sorry, Dave. I didn't realize I still had you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll be very brief. Is it your intention to continue this meeting tomorrow or continue on with the agenda today?
No, we're going to continue till we're done.
Okay, so if with all due respect, this might be one of those moments where if we're going to take a lunch break, if we could take a lunch break and allow somebody to craft a motion that represents sentiments that have been expressed around the table and then put that up so everybody can read it, that might expedite the deliberations.
I have no problem with that. I mean, yeah.
We do lunch break now, and then.
So we can do a lunch break now. We'll come back and we'll finish up our agenda. So don't dilly-dally. Just get you something to eat and come back, or else we'll be meeting until... Do what? Okay, lunch. But get your lunch and come right on back, if you would, please. Uh-oh. Public microphone guy. Oh, okay. Would someone like to dispense of this issue? I think there was some discussion, and I think we've come to some agreements of how to move forward. So since it was your motion, Bob, maybe you can help us out.
I would venture to say, based on the discussions we've had during the lunch break, that this motion may be deemed acceptable. That's my sense, so I'm comfortable with the motion as proposed and as amended, in particular to reflect the focus on the poor status of the stock as a key aspect of this. Thank you.
Is everybody good with the motion on the floor, and everybody's happy? Happy. All right, good.
You need to read it.
All right, I'm going to read it for Joe. Move that the commission send a letter to the Northeast Fishery. What is that? New England Fishery Management Council. I'm like, I don't see that very often. Sorry. Move that the commission send a letter to the New England Fishery Management Council and NOAA Fisheries requesting the initiation of a broader dialogue on the co-management of winter flounder with particular focus on the poor status of the stock and achieving more consistency in the application of management measures in state and federal waters. Motion by Mr. Ballou, seconded by Mr. Gilmore.
Want me to put in the words you left out?
Is that Southern New England? I didn't know what to say, Joe. I know, Southern New England and Massachusetts. Mid-Atlantic. Oh my! I'm sorry, Dave.
You just gave us two more reasons there should be more dialogue with the New England Council as chair of the commission.
Hey, y'all deal with cod and stuff, man. I don't know what is that stuff. Ground fish. Sorry. Southern New England, Mid-Atlantic. Those are confusing acronyms y'all have up there. All right, should I read it again, Joe?
I'll have it. No matter what you say, it'll be right.
Okay. Perfect. You're the man. I gotta learn my New England jargon. I only got 2 more meetings as chairman, though, so all right. Any objection to the motion? Great. The motion carries unanimously. Thank you all. Dave Pierce.
I have one more winter flounder issue, if I may, Mr. Chairman. And it relates to something the New England Council did at its last meeting. And it's very relevant to the discussions we had on winter flounder before lunch, especially a point that was made by representatives from the Mid-Atlantic, I think it was Delaware, about winter flounder coming back. Okay, the need to rebuild, to have winter flounder reestablish itself in areas where it no longer is abundant. The New England Council, and Terry Stockwell can help me with this if I misstate this, we voted to remove the essential fish habitat designation for Delaware Bay and for the southern shore, the coastal waters of New Jersey. And this was done at the request of a Mid-Atlantic Council representative and I think from the chair of the Mid-Atlantic Council. This has been an important issue for the Mid-Atlantic Council. And the argument was winter flounder habitat is no longer down there. It's changed dramatically. That was the argument, from siltation, what have you. Therefore, by removing the EFH designation, it becomes easier for the states of Delaware and for New Jersey, at a minimum, to get involved in a more aggressive way with dredging, with beach enrichment. In other words, no longer would there be a need to deal with terms of reference or time of year restrictions on winter flounder, habitat, to protect winter flounder habitat. So the New England Council did this, and at the time, and I'm still not sure if the state of Delaware and New Jersey understand what the New England Council did, and for that matter, I don't know what the Winter Flounder Board would have done if it had known that this was going to be an action taken by the New England Council. Now, a member of my staff, Stephen Correa, he has been involved with essential fish habitat issues for winter flounder for, it seems like, decades, and he was very influential in helping the Winter Flounder Board, ISFMP, move the plan forward, the initial Winter Flounder plan, having a large element of environmental protection, habitat protection. I recently asked him, what do you think about this action by the New England Council? And he said, you know, I don't think it's such a great idea. It's like saying that we should destroy the prairie because the buffalo are gone. So I'm calling this to the attention of the Policy Board and because of this letter that is going to be sent. Now, I don't know what the proper procedure would be. This is the Policy Board, not the Winter Flounder Board. At a minimum, I would think that the Winter Flounder Board should be tasked, requested to address this issue, to see if indeed it agrees with what the New England Council did to remove this essential fish habitat designation from Delaware Bay, all of Delaware Bay, in the southern part of New Jersey. It's not my neck of the woods, and I don't want to step on the other state's toes, but still, I would think this is still an important issue for those two states. So I look to you for your guidance, Mr. Chairman, as to how this could be addressed by this Policy Board relative to this important issue.
I would just ask if it is a policy board issue, then yes. But if not, we could, for the sake of time, we could deal with it at the working group level. But Doug.
Dave, I just want to make a clarification. It wasn't not a removal of all EFH life stages, designation for all EFH life stages of winter flounder down there. It was a specific removal of the egg life history stage from down there. And that is because they haven't seen the data that was brought before the Habitat Committee was, and this was data outside of trawl surveys. This was egg deposition surveys that had been done by someone down in New Jersey, a researcher down there. And the impact of this is, and it would probably be good if the Commission as a whole got the full details of this from our Habitat Committee PDT person, Michelle Bachman, but it was apparently it was having an effect on the ability of some harbors to even be dredged because of this egg EFH designation, not because of adults that were there, but because of the egg designation. And so because there hadn't been eggs there and been found there in a number of years, we felt it appropriate to at least recommend to the council that it be moved up to the Atlantic City area up there. So if we are going to take this on, I think we should get Michelle Bachman down here to give us a little clarification of exactly what was done.
Dave Borden.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I attended that Habitat Committee meeting that Doug is referencing, and I agree with everything he said. I think there's probably a pretty good written record on this that the council staff, we've got a council staff member in the audience, and I think that if he goes back and simply asks staff to provide a written record on the basis of the decision, I think that'll accelerate the handling of the issue. Thank you.
Any final word, Dave Pierce?
Yeah, just a quick follow-up. Yes, Doug is quite right. Eggs, but winter flounder lay demersal eggs. They lay their eggs in the shallow bays and estuaries. So, for all practical purposes, it's winter flounder essential fish habitat. Yes, indeed, council staff looked into this, and that's fine and dandy. And I was guided by that particular analysis done by her and staff. But I just did not know, and still do not know, the perspectives of the states of Delaware and New Jersey on this. They may be completely in agreement with it. However, again, this is winter flounder, and it's about successful reproduction. And as noted earlier this morning before lunch, there's a desire for winter flounder rebuilding with the anticipation that they will reestablish themselves in areas where they used to be extremely abundant, not so much now. So you take away the habitat, destroy the habitat, are they going to be able to come back and reproduce? Potentially, but maybe not. So again, I'm just looking for some guidance as to how to proceed in a way that would be timely and responsive to what the New England Council has done.
Dave, what we can do is I'll work with Michelle to get the information that was discussed at the meeting. I'll work with John and Brandon to get New Jersey's opinions, and then we can take that to that coordinated working group to see how we want to move forward with that. That includes both NOAA Fisheries, council staff, and council members, and move us forward in that direction.
So we're done discussing this issue. Okay.
Tom says stand up.
We're done talking about this issue. I got to move on. I just got to. I got to move. We're so far behind, and we're taking into everybody else's time.
All right.
Go ahead.
This is just a brief update to the policy board on actions that the Mid-Atlantic Fishery Management Council has been considering for unmanaged forage species. The council initiated a regulatory action to prohibit the development of new or expansion of existing directive fisheries on unmanaged forage species until scientific information is available to promote ecosystem sustainability. They would not expand or start new fisheries is what they're looking to do. The council at their April meeting discussed a series of possibilities to move forward with this type of action, and they are considering moving forward with taking this action as amending an FMP to include ecosystem components within the species. And they're considering to add this action as a part of either the bluefish or the mackerel, squid, butterfish FMPs, and they would be ecosystem components within them. The thought behind adding it to the mackerel, squid, butterfish FMP is that those are there are forage species included in there. And then looking at the bluefish FMP, it is a bluefish prey on forage species. The advantage that they discussed for adding to the bluefish FMP is that it is a coast-wide fishery management plan, so they would be able to get the full range of the Atlantic coast there. Commission staff was at that meeting, and we did have a concern with adding this component into the bluefish FMP because it is a coast-wide measure, and that the commission does have a bluefish FMP as well, that not all states are on the Mid-Atlantic Council, so they wouldn't be a part of the voting process there if they did amend the bluefish FMP. So we had said to the council, in order to get information about what's going on with the states, particularly states that are not on the Mid-Atlantic Council, that we would request from the states what forage species you are currently managing, as well as what types of provisions do you have in your state regulations to prevent emerging forage fisheries. So we're going to do that through the MSC. So if you get these requests from your staff, this is where they're coming coming from, and then we're going to present those back to the council at their June meeting as they continue forward with deliberations. And if you have any particular concerns or questions about this, you can contact myself or Pat or Bob, and we can work with you to address those.
Satisfactory to everyone? Looks like it. Thank you, Tony. Lisa's up. Lisa's up on ACC.
No, Atlantic Coast Fish Habitat Partnership.
Yep, that.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to give a very brief update on the Atlantic Coastal Fish Habitat Partnership Steering Committee meeting that was held April 20th through 22nd. We have a couple of science and data updates that we discussed at the meeting. The first one was a decision support tool to assess aquatic habitats and threats in the North Atlantic watersheds and estuaries. We are currently wrapping up the winter flounder model for Narragansett Bay and Long Island Sound, and we're working on the final report for that. And we're moving on to river herring today, actually. We have a call at 2 p.m. We also had a discussion about our NIFWIF-funded river herring habitat restoration strategies project, and that final report was submitted to NIFWIF back on Friday. We discussed the potential for ACFIP to submit a proposal to the Mid-Atlantic FMC on working on offshore reef restoration and monitoring, and we're going to move forward with that proposal and submit it once the RFP is officially put out there. We also had a discussion on ocean acidification, and we would like to incorporate more work on ocean acidification in our next conservation strategic plan in 2017, and also incorporate it more into our science and data needs in the future. And we plan on having an in-person meeting with our science and data work group this summer as well. We had an in-depth discussion about our implementation plan, and we evaluated the status of every action item in the plan and identified new tasks to address because we had completed over 50% of the tasks that we had set out to accomplish. We received an update from Ryan Roberts, who is the communications coordinator for the National Fish Habitat Partnership, and he talked about the 501c3 status of the National Fish Habitat Partnership, and we currently have received that status, and we're working on the tax status of that. And we also got an update on the rebranding and marketing of the National Fish Habitat Partnership, and back in March, I presented to the National Fish Habitat Partnership Board in Arlington, Virginia. So I talked about that as well. And then Steve Perry, who is the coordinator for the Eastern Brook Trout Joint Venture, gave an update to the steering committee on the Whitewater to Blue Water initiative that the Eastern Brook Trout Joint Venture, ACFIP, and the Southeast Aquatic Resources Partnership is working on together. The North Carolina Coastal Federation was welcomed into the partnership after applying earlier in the spring and making a presentation to the committee at the meeting back in April. So we're excited. This is our 33rd partner to sign the MOU for ACFIP. That got shifted a little bit. Julie Devers from the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service gave an update on the different gave an update on the different projects that ACFIP recommended for funding to the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, and they're listed here in order of priority. The first one was ACFIP operations, followed by a fish passage project in Patton Stream, Maine, and then a dam removal project in Bridgewater, Massachusetts, a dam removal project in New Haven, Connecticut, shoreline stabilization in Charleston, South Carolina, river enhancement in Cape Fear, North Carolina, and a dam removal project in Dover, New Hampshire. So there were a lot of proposals this year for dam removals. So 2015 is the year of the dam for us. In other business, we discussed the potential to change and update our proposal criteria for evaluating proposals that are submitted to ACFIP, and we formed a subcommittee in order to work on this further. Pat gave an update on the business plan, Pat Campfield, the ACFIP is working on in order to solicit donations once the fund is in place so that we can build and work on different ways in order for ACFIP to receive money in order to work on grants. We had guest presentations from local scientists working on different issues in the South Florida region. We learned about lionfish invasion, marine debris, and also coral reef restoration in nurseries in South Florida. And we had a site visit to one of the projects that we endorsed, Grassy Flats in Lake Worth Lagoon as well. And with that, I'll take any questions.
Questions for Lisa? Seeing none, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Back to Tony, Habitat Committee report.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The Habitat Committee met in conjunction, or right after the ACFIP Committee did, and the committee has decided on a new topic for the Habitat Hotline for the upcoming year, which will be on energy development. Jake Kreitzer is taking over as the new chairman of the Habitat Committee. Kent Smith's time has finished for his 2 years as the committee chair, and I would like to thank Kent, even though he is not here, for his leadership and guidance. He's done a fabulous job taking the Habitat Committee's new guidance and work plan and moving them forward to address Commission species needs concerning habitat. And January Murray was elected as the new vice chair from Georgia. I also would like to thank Melissa for all of her work that she's done as the Habitat Committee staff person as she moves on to her new greener pastures in California, or sunnier pastures, I should say. And Lisa Havel, who was just giving our ACFIP report, has agreed to test out the waters for being the Habitat staff coordinator for both ACFIP and Habitat, and she's going to see how well she can balance the workloads between those two committees, and if it works out for the next 6 months or so, and then we'll report back after annual meeting to see if she wants to continue to move forward with that or just go back to just doing the ACFIP coordination. And within a month, the Habitat fact sheets will be updated on the website, and just as a reminder, the Habitat fact sheets include information on movement and migration, spawning, habitat use, threats to habitat, habitat areas of particular concern, and recommendations to improve habitat quality. And we hope that these are useful for folks as they work with your other state agencies on different issues concerning fisheries habitat and help leverage those partnerships and management measures as moving forward, especially when the FMPs don't have as much information in them. These fact sheets can be very useful for those. And then lastly, the focus for the next species to address some of the habitat needs will be tautog, as the tautog board is likely to move forward with an amendment to address the concerns of the newly released stock assessment that the board saw back in February. And that's the majority of the action items that came out of the Habitat Committee. Any questions?
Tom?
It's more of a concern than a question. And I'm wondering if it's happened in other states besides New Jersey. Because of hurricane like Sandy, we start beach replenishment looking at. And the Army Corps of Engineers, its usual infinite wisdom, has decided that the best place to get the sand is on some of the fishing lumps. Now, these lumps have been designated by the National Marine Fisheries Service as areas you can't sand mine. They were under the Coastal Zone Management Act. And so they amended their EIS to basically say, okay, we'll only take 70% of the lump. So, and then we'll profile it after we're done. I'm saying, if you take 70 cents, how can you profile? And they're doing this for 2 or 3 lumps in the one area. Thank God there's been some lawsuits, so they can't do beach replenishment, and there'll probably be a lawsuit over this. But I was wondering if that's happening in other areas, because it seems that the Army Corps is looking for the fastest and easiest place to mine the sand, and we were able to fight off the glass companies 35 years ago when they wanted to basically flatten all the lumps in New Jersey. They would do us a favor, make it essential fish habitat as they thought it, and they wanted to use to make glass. But now when you're dealing with the Army Corps of Engineers, it's a lot more difficult. They have a lot more power than the glass companies do, and they're very hard to defeat on this issue, especially when the states are looking, well, maybe it's what we need to do beach replenishment for. So I'm just asking if any other states are having the same type of problem.
Mr. Adler?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We had the situation up in Boston where actually it was the state wanted to take cobble to repair a beach. And it was lobster harvey, and it was also in the cod conservation zone, and it was off of Winthrop, Massachusetts. And the association threatened to sue the state, and there resulted in meetings where the state said, well, we'll never do it again. We'll always come to you or come to everybody before we ever do anything if you would drop your legal action. And we did. However, we knew coming up behind us was the National Marine Fisheries Service with their habitat protection thing at that time. And we had suggested that the city or the state get their source from land-based. They said it's too expensive. We're going to just go out there and pull up the bottom. Come to find out, the National Marine Fisheries Service stepped in, said you can't do it because it's cod area, and they never got the permit to do it. And they did have to go to the Army Corps, but somehow it seemed like the National Marine Fisheries Service had a big hand in that decision, and it never was taken because they ran into all these other pitfalls. And if they had taken our advice in the first place, it would have been done in 6 months if they just took the stuff from the land source. And as it is, this is several years now. They never got the permission to take the cobble away.
Thank you, Bill. Anyone else? If not, any other questions for Tony? Habitat Committee? All right, if not, we will go to Mark Robinson for the Law Enforcement Committee report.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The Law Enforcement Committee met yesterday and this morning, and we had a very good meeting again as usual. One of the key topics that we touched on was to review the current draft Jonah Crab Management Plan and some of the key features of that plan that might warrant some law enforcement input to you all. So we had a good review of that and decided in that initial review to establish a subcommittee that will work with Tony and with their states to take a look at that fishery, and we would be in a position to provide you or the Lobster Board with some law enforcement guidance in a written form at a later date. I presume possibly August. Yeah. So we're on track to do that and to respond to some of those key issues, such as the minimum size recommendations or how to address permitting and the question of tolerances and how law enforcement might view that issue of tolerances and landings. We have a lot of new members, and we also have people retiring. As you know, our chairman, Lloyd Ingerson, is retiring. And so part of our Part of our discussions during our meeting this time around were to reinforce the addition of alternate representatives of the LEC to the various species management boards, in part so that we can make sure we have people who are available to you all to provide law enforcement advice, and also to give an opportunity for some of our newer members to kind of get more acquainted with some of the species management issues that you all are dealing with. So I look forward to doing that, and hopefully you'll be able to get to know some of these new folks on the LEC. We had a couple good discussions and some information sharing that turned out to be pretty valuable with regard to some of the safe harbor provisions that a few of the states are addressing, particularly for the summer flounder fisheries along their coast. And we just had some pretty frank and open exchange about how the states are handling those safe harbor requests, whether we have written policies or regulations in place, and so I think that was a very good exchange for the LEC to have. We also had a good discussion this morning about closed areas, and in particular whether specific kinds of closed area boundaries or boundary designations, whether you use depth contours or latitude, longitude, whether they should be regular shaped or if there are enforcement problems with irregular shaped boundaries. These are things that came out when we were working on the revisions to our enforceability guidelines. And there's a kind of a wide range of enforcement opinions about how best is it to design closed area boundaries or protected area boundaries so that you can make enforcement as feasible as possible. We also, because of the retirement of our chairman, Lloyd Ingerson, we did have an election for our new chairman, who will be Mike Eastman from New Hampshire. And we voted for a new vice chair, Steve Anthony from North Carolina, so they will be helping out in the future LEC meetings. And the last point I will make, and I'll be working with Tony on this, back in 2014, one of our action plan tasks that the LEC was to address was to revise the enforceability guidelines that were first drafted back in 2009. And we've referred to them on occasion in meetings, and I think you may be familiar with them. We've completed that review and revision of that document, and I'm submitting it to Tony and to the staff. And just as a heads up, I think you may be seeing that, or we may be bringing that to you at a future date for your consideration and hopefully approval. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I'll conclude my report.
Pat? Yeah, thank you, Mark. Excellent report. Question, did the subject of tracking blackfish to come up? I know a couple of years ago we talked about a possible tagging program, and that fell, I think you agreed with it, your group agreed with it at the point in time, but it kind of fell on deaf ears for some reason or another. But would you address that, or could you address that in your May 13th, 14th meeting? Possibly come up with some recommendations as to how we can get a better handle on the illegal dealing of the live fish market?
Yes. Yes, Mr. Augustine. I know it did come up before, and I think we did have some discussions, and I don't know where those ended up, but we can go back and re-examine what we presented. It'd probably be a good thing for the LEC to review that issue and make any adjustments and recommendations to you, if that's what the Commission would desire.
Follow on, Mr. Chairman. From what I understand, there's more illegal harvest going on now than ever. There hasn't seemed to be a slowdown. I know in our state, I've heard similar reports, but it's only anecdotal. But I think it's a real major concern. So I think we need to put some priority on that. And we only discussed it, I think it was in Philadelphia, a short period of time. Toward the end of the meeting, we ran out of time. But it appeared there was some interest in looking at a tagging program and for commercially harvested fish. So I sure will hopefully look forward to seeing a follow-up on that. Thanks.
Pat maybe at the Chautauqua board, this issue could be brought up under other business, and the Chautauqua board could give more specificity to what it is that they would like to see from the law enforcement committee, and then they can report back at the August meeting.
Good suggestion. Brandon?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thanks, Mark, for your report. I just had a question in regards to the the safe harbor discussion that the committee had. You know, safe harbor has been an issue for a few states, and the implications of that. So I was just wondering, it was law enforcement committee, thinking about discussing maybe a coastwide sort of standard policy to apply, or go back in each state, kind of discuss what they might want to do, or just curious as to where the law enforcement committee may take that discussion.
Yes, be happy to. We didn't conclude to do anything as a follow-up. There was a request for information, and I believe Rhode Island has a specific policy on how they address requests for safe harbor, so sort of a checklist of criteria. And some of the other states were looking for information or guidance as to how they could address these kind of requests, and most of the other states do not have any kind of specific policy on how to approve a safe harbor request from a vessel coming from up the coast who needs to come in to port. There may not be a specific set of criteria for allowing or disallowing that. I believe maybe Virginia has, instead of a policy, they have actual regulations in place for addressing a safe harbor request. So there was more of just an information sharing. In fact, there wasn't really total agreement on whether a policy is good or bad, or if there should be a policy, or if you should use more open discretion, or if it should just be done by regulation. There was certainly agreement that you have to have some kind of provision to allow vessels to seek safe harbor when they need to, but you also have to be very careful that that doesn't get abused. And there was some discussion about how that potentially can be abused if you have a repeated request for safe harbor, particularly with people who are fishing up the coast for a particular species.
Any other questions for law enforcement? Just as an update, we were about that close to entering into the JEA, but we didn't quite get there, and there's now another bill in the North Carolina, I believe it's in the Senate, that would prohibit North Carolina from entering into the JEA again. So I'm sure Steve probably updated the law enforcement committee on that, but just we remain the sole holdout on the joint enforcement agreement. So thank you, Mark. George. Where's old George? We put this off as long as we could, George.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I appreciate time on your agenda today. I'm here to report on the Northeast Ocean Planning process, or the New England planning process, if you have confusion about those two. And it's nice to see people here. What's that? Or Nebraska. Well, this is not Nebraska. I'm going to report briefly on the regional planning body efforts in the Northeast, because John Weber is not here with me, and then talk about the fish mapping that I've been doing on contract with the Northeast Regional Ocean Council. So this is just a bit of background. The Northeast Regional Planning Body was set up under the National Ocean Policy in late 2012, and they're on track to do an ocean plan for the Northeast in 2016. I think you know that marine is salty, but this is a slide I stole. The focus of the Northeast plan is from Long Island Sound through the Gulf of Maine. They want the plan to be scientifically based. They want a lot of public involvement. They want it to be principled and practical, and to implement under existing authorities. The Northeast Planning Body is 10 federal agencies, the states, and 10 federally recognized tribes as well. Ex officio membership by Canada and New York, so you can see from this, and the New England Council, Doug Grout sits on it for the New England Council, you can see it as a diverse group. The timeline for the regional planning body is that through June 2015, they're going to do outreach to various interests, shipping, fishing, recreation, etc. They're trying to develop a marine life database with expert work groups, which I'll talk a little bit about later. They held an ecosystem-based management workshop on the 8th of April in New Hampshire, trying to figure out how to come to grips with ecosystem-based management like the rest of us have. On the 12th of May next week, they have a stakeholder forum in Salem, Massachusetts, to talk about the work done to date and the process moving forward. The regional planning body will meet in early June in Mystic, Connecticut. Thank you. And after that meeting, they will go largely into work mode, trying to complete the plan for June of 2016. That's some of the data. I'm going to skip to that. So the fishing part, I've been contracted with NROC to work on fishing mapping, and we have used vessel monitoring system data. That's a map shown here, the scallop fishery based on VMS pings, trying to look at spatial patterns and patterns over time of the fishing industry for those fisheries that have VMS requirements, and we've included in the second part of the project, separating fishing from transit areas based on vessel speed. Not perfect, but not bad. We are working on a pilot project to try to work with charter captains to identify recreational fishing in transit areas. I'll show you a little bit about that later. And then looking at methods of trying to fill gaps for other species, particularly lobster. And I'll talk about that in a bit as well. So the VMS maps, our early project had VMS maps for groundfish, monkfish, scallops, the species listed on top from 26 to 2010. We have gotten data as well from 2011 through 2013 and 2014, so it allows us to look at changes over time. The map on the right of your screen is herring fishing from 2011 through 2013 below 4 knots because people in the industry told us above 4 knots was for transiting, and this color scale is standard deviations around the mean for mean numbers of VMS pings. And so blue and green are lower levels of numbers of pings, and orange, yellow, orange, and red are higher numbers, showing higher levels of activity, which are correlated with higher levels of fishing. We have recently gotten a map for, or the data for squid, mackerel, and butterfish, which started a VMS requirement in September of last year. And I talked briefly about the fishing transit differentiation by speed. We've done that for all the species above as well. On the party charter pilot project, this was some work was done last year with folks in Rhode Island. Rick Bellavance is probably the most visible spokesperson, and these are tracks of his charter vessel used with his permission. And we are trying to get people to participate, and the software, and we're working with ACCSP on this, allows electronic reporting and also allows reporting of location. Clearly a sensitive issue for some charter captains. In the case of a guy like Rick, he doesn't care if people know exactly where he fishes. For other people, we've talked about the ability to generalize or make the areas fuzzy, because from an ocean planning perspective, if we're within a quarter mile, it's like playing horseshoes. You still get points, but we don't need to know exact locations. And we are actively seeking charter captains to help us with this year. For lobster fishing, this was something people really wanted done, and we're really no closer than we were before. There's no consistent mapping of lobster effort region-wide. The best map I have found to date is the one that is on your screen, and that is the N-line survey that NIMS did of pots and traps along the coast. So clearly, as you get farther south, there's more types of traps than just lobster fishing. But for consistent application across the region, this is the best map I have found. And we originally thought we could mash together different state and sub-regional mapping efforts, but we found limited utility in that just because of trying to do apples to oranges comparisons. For marine life, the characterization, the team has worked with Duke and NOAA trying to characterize different types of marine life. You can see here the breakdown for marine mammals, turtles, birds, etc., and looking at spatial models that integrate observations over time, and importantly looking at distribution and abundance over multiple temporal scales, looking at persistence, looking at probability of occurrence and uncertainty. No small task for sure. But they're working on that. Just talks more about the data synthesis, and so that is my presentation. I would be happy to talk to state folks about the fish mapping work that we've been doing in more detail. We've got like 30 maps, and so this isn't the time or the place for that. I would also welcome the chance to talk to states about the party charter mapping as well.
Thank you, George. Questions for George? Mr. Adler.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. George, have you been in touch with the Ocean Partnership? I think it used to be called Mass Ocean Partnership in Massachusetts, where they did a survey on recreational activities. Have you contacted them at all?
I haven't, Bill, but NROC has. One of the slides I skipped over talks about all the things NROC is looking at. Can we see this well? So they've looked at these various categories, and recreation is one of the things that they did look at. They did it through, I believe, surveying different recreational users along the coast.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that they did do a survey which could, go into your overall thing. So they hadn't done lobster yet, but they were going to, because they're very much involved with the ocean plan, Massachusetts ocean plan, and on beyond that. So I didn't know if you knew of their whereabouts or whatever.
I don't so much, just because I've been working on the commercial fishing characterization, but I know NROC has been. Their characterization of recreational use isn't just recreational fishing, it's all kinds of recreational boating, so it's a broader class of activities. But there is, you can see from this slide, emphasis on a lot of both human activities and marine life, and my observation is that ocean planning groupies talk to one another a lot, so I suspect they are aware of what they are doing.
John Clark.
Thank you. George, is there a lot of suspicion about the goals of the RPB up in New England? I noticed, in the reauthorization of Magnus and Stevens, there's still that language in there to prevent nymphs from sharing fishing data with these, with any of the national ocean policy, like these RPBs. And I know in the Mid-Atlantic, there's a lot of, even though the goals seem pretty general and all that, a lot of people are very suspicious about the whole process.
I'm shocked, John, because there's no suspicion in New England whatsoever. There is. There's a lot of suspicion for a couple reasons. One is, I was at the New England Council meeting, and one fishing industry representative said, well, because this effort is funded by Packard and Pew, which it's not in New England, it is clearly part of the conspiracy to get rid of fishing and put in oil gas exploration on George's Bank. And so there is a lot of suspicion about, pushing traditional uses aside. And part of that suspicion, or I guess one of the things that fuels part of the concern and the suspicion is that they are developing what they want to do in the long term, so they don't really have a strong plan yet. So, people say, well, are you going to include this activity? And some of the answers so far are no, or we don't know, rather. And so because of that lack of clarity, I think that raises suspicions. Doug, is that a fair characterization?
Yeah, it's a fair characterization, and one of the things in my participation in this is that the fishing industries aren't as involved with this as the environmental groups. The environmental groups are heavily involved at every meeting, in fact, one of the meetings that ecosystem-based fisheries management or ecosystem-based management was changed to accommodate the environmental group schedule.
Just wanted to ask if whether you're also getting a lot of suspicion that this is to set up marine protected areas up there, because that's one we hear a lot also.
I think the short answer is yes, but because the New England Council spent so much time on their habitat amendment, I think that suspicions about marine protected areas have been diverted to them and not to us, but it'll likely come back. But you know, because there are many interests, like Doug said, you know, about what happens in the future, and because MPAs or no-use areas are part of that, it does fuel that concern.
Roy?
George, I've kind of lost touch over the past several years with what's been going on in the Mid-Atlantic area in this regard. Do those folks have anyone such as yourself that has state and federal level fisheries experience guiding them as well? Thank you.
There is a group called MARCO, Mid-Atlantic Regional Council on the Ocean, and they are interested in similar things. And I don't know a lot more about that, Roy. There is. I'll have to follow up with you exactly on who the contact person is, but there's a similar effort in the Mid-Atlantic.
Tom?
Yeah, actually, I was at a panel discussion with the group about, I guess, 3 weeks ago at Monmouth University. A person from DEP is involved with it. There's also somebody on the Mid-Atlantic, I can't remember whose name it is, but they represent the fisheries end of it. You know, I and Bruce Friedman have attended most of their meetings throughout their things, and it's interesting. They had the cable people there that put all the cables in the ocean. They had the wind people there, and they were showing this Frontiers 2. I don't know if you've seen that yet, George, but that's where you all work in Massachusetts and Rhode Island, kumbaya together to plan where you're putting everything. So it was an interesting thing, but they're active. Of course, they have no authority to do anything. They're just planning, and it's interesting because in New Jersey, the environmental groups, especially one of the big ones, is not giving much support. They're actually fighting them all the time because they're afraid they're going to take control away from the states. So it's an interesting dichotomy in New Jersey.
Any further questions for George? If not, thank you, George.
Thank you.
This moves us down to other business. A few folks grabbed me at lunch and said they had additional other business issues. If we can go ahead and get those mentioned one more time for me. I know John Bull has an issue on black sea bass. And my pen doesn't work. So Tony's got it. And then there was one other, I think it was Emerson, yes. What was your?
RSA.
All right, I'm trying to RSA. Oh, research set-asides. I got it now. New England Fisheries.
It's like MA.
Don't screw me up like that. Where did Dan go? Or is there? Okay, you going to come to the table? Because you are welcome.
Thank you, Louis. At the Lobster Board meeting, we worked on a couple of issues I think that need to have further action. One of them had to do with the recent findings, cumulative findings, that the lobster ghost panels may not be as successful as we were assuming at releasing and allowing lobsters and other bycatch to escape a lobster trap that might have been lost on the ocean floor. And so the suggestion was to have this group task the Commission's Gear Technology Working Group to work with the trap manufacturers and the lobstermen to assess the effectiveness and maybe make some recommendations. And then the second issue has to do with developments that are occurring right now at the New England Council concerning the Habitat Amendment and new scallop rules. And this is a follow-up to correspondence that the Lobster Board made at a previous meeting concerning possible bycatch of egg-bearing and otherwise reproductive female lobsters in closed area 2 seasonally. And we'd like to send a follow-up letter to the Council and NIMS reiterating our concerns. And there's 2 motions on the board. Would you like me to read them both?
Yeah, why don't you read them one at a time, and then because they're from the Lobster Board, so we don't need a second. So if you'll just read those into the record, I'll take the vote.
First is on behalf of the Lobster Board, recommend the Commission task the Gear Technology Working Group to work with industry to assess lobster ghost panel effectiveness.
All right. Is there any Dave Borden?
Just a quick question. Working with the industry, could Tony tell me what the process is for doing that, please? Thank you.
I assume that we'll work with the Vice Chair and Chair, yourself and Dan, to identify members of the industry that we think would be good to include in this meeting, as not only fishermen, but as well as gear manufacturers, such as trap manufacturers, to talk about different ways that we utilize ghost panels. Because I know that fishermen also have different ways of adhering tops, etc., to traps. And we would also look at other studies besides the ones that came out of the Fishing for Energy workshop.
Yeah, just a quick follow-up, Mr. Chairman. I mean, I totally agree with what Tony proposed. I think it's a good idea. This is a big issue for the lobster industry because of the volume of traps that are involved. I mean, literally, there are millions of traps involved in the fisheries. So we have to have plenty of industry input and think through this carefully. Thank you.
Yeah, those of us involved in the Black Sea bass pot fishery in the South Atlantic are very aware of how many pots there are in New England. Any further questions or comments on the motion? Is there any objection to the motion? Yeah? Dave?
Yeah, your response actually triggered a thought, and I had made the statement to Dan at the meeting that I think this working group actually should think in a broader context. In other words, if we're going to have ghost panels be effective, it not only applies to the lobster fishery, it should apply to fish pots. I mean, we got the same issues with fish pots, and so I think that should be factored in at least to the discussions. Thank you.
Anything else on the motion? Is there any objection to the motion? Seeing none, the motion carries. Dan?
The second motion is on behalf of the Lobster Board, recommend the Commission send a letter to the New England Fisheries Management Council reiterating our concerns for lobster and request a prohibition on all bottom tending mobile gear in closed area 2 from June 15th to October 31st, north of 41 degrees 30 minutes.
Any comments on this motion? Questions? Dr. Pierce.
Just a little background. the groundfish fishery, the sector fishermen in New England have actually got an agreement with the lobstermen to protect the egg-bearing lobsters by living with this particular approach. That is staying out of closed area 2 from June 15 to October 31st north of that line of latitude. Unfortunately, the sea scallop fishery has not yet agreed to abide by this particular approach, despite the best efforts of David Borden and others to try to get the scallopers to reach that agreement. As a consequence of the last New England Council meeting, I made a motion relative to this prohibition as part of the Omnibus Habitat Amendment and what we're doing with closed area 2 on Georges Bank. The motion was tabled. Actually, it was postponed until our June meeting in hopes that the scallopers will actually be able to reach some agreement with representatives of the lobster fishery. As of this moment, at this time, it doesn't appear that we're going to have that agreement. So this will be revisited. This issue will be revisited at the New England Council, and it would be very useful for ASMFC to once again reaffirm its concern about mobile gear fishing on these lobsters at that time and in that area. So this is a very good motion, in my opinion, on behalf of the Lobster Board.
Doug?
David said most of what I was just going to say. This is an issue that I think is very important, given the amount of egg-bearing female lobsters that are out there, and I support this motion.
Any other comments on the motion? Mr. Adler?
Yes, very briefly. Remember when this idea came up of opening this area, which had been closed, and the agreement indicated that as long as the bottom tending gear, mostly groundfish, could come in here and the lobstermen would remove their gear from the area after this area opened up after October. And it was interesting that when the agreement was reached, the federal government, or whether it's NIMS or NIMS, sort of put it to the ground fishermen who they manage that you will keep to this agreement. However, they said we can't tell the lobster guys what to do. And so it came to this body of the Lobster Board, and we actually did an addendum, I think it was 20, that basically put the agreement to the lobster fleet out there that you got to abide by the agreement. So we're sort of involved in this. And we have gone through the efforts to get the bottom tending mobile gear, except scallops, and the lobstermen out there to work together with an agreement that they worked out. So we're involved in this, and that's why I support this motion, because the glitch is if they open the area to the mobile gear, and if they do open it, there's no constraints on the scallop fleet from dragging into this area and getting into gear conflicts, destroying the resource there, unless they abide by the same agreement that the groundfish people have agreed to, and that's all.
Okay, is there any objection to this motion? There is objection.
NOAA Fisheries would just like to abstain.
Abstain, okay. So, with no objection and one abstention, the motion carries. All right, I think I've got Jim Gilmore and Richie. I think that says Richie. Richie's gone, I think, but I don't know.
Conservation equivalency.
But conservation equivalency?
Steve, can you do it?
Steve? I don't know what they wanted to talk about, so Doug?
It's essentially what we talked about at the executive committee under other businesses, that we should take a fresh look at our conservation equivalency policy. Richie didn't realize that I brought that up at the end, and I think if we bring it back to the executive committee, and the executive committee can then, after reviewing it, bring it to the policy board, just to refresh people's memory and to see if we need to make any changes in light of having 50-some-odd conservational equivalency proposals in our striped bass addendum 4.
And the executive committee is moving forward with looking at that, because really that's not the intent of a conservation equivalency, at least not in some people's opinion. So we're going to look at that in more detail. All right. Nothing else on that. We'll go to Mr. Bull from Virginia.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm going to make this succinct here, not trespass on the board's time here. It's been a long day here. I have a couple issues that are related to black sea bass management coastwide here. As some of you may know, last year the National Marine Fisheries Service was considering an early closure coastwide here for fears that we were going to blow through the coastwide quota, and there was a bit of an overage here. But the impending potential early closure here caused me some great concerns here, and it's partially because of how Virginia manages its commercial black sea bass fishery. Our harvesters work on IFQs, and they often delay their harvest till the end of the year here to time the market. And we have significant landings at the end of the year in November and December. Last 3 years has averaged 50 to 100,000 pounds, which to some of you I'm sure will seem like an awful lot of black sea bass. As it stands now, if we are faced with an early closure coastwide here, Virginia's commercial harvesters will likely be stuck with some significant quota they will not be able to use. This strikes me as something that we should be concerned about. Virginia is very concerned about this. We keep a close eye on our black sea bass harvest. We have hail in and hail out to keep a real close eye here on the bycatch. And the IFQs here give our anglers the opportunity here to time their landings here so that we're not dumping fish on the market when other states are harvesting in fair numbers here. I'm not sure what the right answer to this is, but it strikes me that we could use some commission staff help here in more closely eyeing the landings along the coast here to have a better idea if we're going to get close to a coastwide overage. And I would be very hopeful that the facilitation of transfers would be a tool to help manage that. The other related issue is that it's the payback system. We got a bit of an overage coastwide last year here. We don't manage paybacks with black sea bass the same we do with flounder. This isn't a state by state. The state pays back its overage pound by pound. This payback is spread across the coast. No? All right, then I misunderstood that. In which case, then, really my big concern here is the potential for an early closure and what we can do to make sure that that doesn't happen. I would hate to see Virginia's IFQ holders here harvesting earlier in the year just to get out of the way and not risk it when it wouldn't be to anyone else's benefit that would happen. So I'm open for any questions, and I thanks for consideration in the time.
John, just to inform the policy board, for those that aren't a part of the Summer Flounder Scut Black Sea Bass Board, commission staff does monitor the quota. We rely on the NOAA quota monitoring report, so that information does have delays in reporting as dealers don't always report on time or have errors and changes to their reporting. And when we see that a state is getting close to their quota, we let that state know, and then the state takes action to close their fishery. I know in recent past, for example, the state of New York was informed by NOAA Fisheries that they had made an error in their reporting, which caused the state to go over their quota. which they wouldn't have done if there hadn't been the error in the reporting through the system. But we will be sure to keep an eye on that. We can talk with ACCSP to see if there is more up-to-date information that we can use to try to get that to stay on top of it. And I know the states themselves also do their best to stay on top of the quota. With such a small quota for black sea bass, it can be difficult to manage that quota in states like Massachusetts, where at times their quota is achieved in a week's time, which can be difficult to stay right precisely on the quota. In terms of overages, what we do is if the coastwide quota is not achieved, then any state's overage is cleared because the coastwide quota was not achieved. When the coastwide quota is achieved and there are overages, we take the overage out of the states that had overages proportional to the overage that they achieved. Just in case there was some underages, we'll account for those from the other states, and then those states that had overages, it'll come out of their state-specific quota for the next year.
Thank you, Tony.
Dave?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is kind of an unusual situation because John's fishery is being managed with an IFQ. It's almost like we should set up a dialogue between our staff and the Virginia staff and NIMS and just talk about the problem more in detail and figure out, I mean, logically to me, we would exempt Virginia from any federal closure that resulted as long as they adhered to their IFQ. In other words, they're constrained by their IFQ. If they catch it during the last week of the season, the problem here is, and let me be explicit, the problem is if all the states have an overage and NIMS looks at the projections and then they close based on that, and Virginia has 100,000 pounds left for the last 2 weeks, they get closed out when there's no need to close them out. That's the problem. So I think you could resolve this with a discussion to some extent.
Dave?
Yeah, I think the issue comes up because with joint management, the Mid-Atlantic Council manages a coastwide quota. It's the commission that's doing the state-by-state quota, and so what's happening is the feds are looking at the big picture, seeing we're at an overage and closing the whole coast, and that's jamming Virginia's plans up. So.
Yeah, it creates a problem. I mean, we run into a similar situation with summer flounder, where we have to get our season. We don't want to go too early for our fall fishery in fear that we might go over and have a coastwide closure before our season's over. So we have a similar problem to that issue in summer flounder. But my understanding is that when NIMS closes it, they wouldn't give you an exemption. We'd have to somehow come up with an agreement that they wouldn't pin the Virginia boats for being in the EEZ with black sea bass. Did you have something, Dave?
I just kind of echo what I said before. I think it's going to be problematic for this committee to kind of deal with this. I think we need somebody to go work on the situation, and just talk about all the different aspects of it. I think they're well known, and then bring a recommendation back that kind of addresses not only John's concerns but some of your concerns. It's going to be a different way of handling this, given the situation. Thank you.
The other issue that we have is that North Carolina, their landings are only north of Hatteras, but when we look at the quota, it's all of North Carolina's landings, and so the projections that come from NOAA do not proportion out the southern part of North Carolina's landings, and so it also makes us look like we're going to hit the quotas sooner than we are, so we can continue to work with NOAA on that issue. And there had been discussions in the past with the Mid-Atlantic Council about aligning the plans to have state-by-state allocations in the federal plan as well as the commission plan. We've moved ahead with different priorities for amendments, and so it is an issue that could come back, and John or Rob, since Rob sits on the Council for Virginia, can bring that issue up as another way to address it, and we can continue to follow up with NOAA Fisheries on some of these issues.
Well, one little piece of other business that I had that I'll go ahead and lay out there is I talked with John before he left, John Bullard, before he left, and he's been coming to these meetings, and one of the things that he was hoping to do, and I kind of missed the hint, I guess, was that there would be opportunities at the executive committee for the state directors primarily that sit on the executive committee, but others as well, to have an opportunity to dialogue with John. And so what I was going to do is talk with Tony and Bob and try to get a little longer executive committee meeting that would give us at least, say, a half an hour at the beginning of the meeting or whenever to have an opportunity to have dialogue with him. And I think this would be a good first topic that we could put on that agenda for the next executive committee. And that would be that would be an open session too. So I think you got some issues there, and with the IFQs, I think we want to try to support those where they're used and try to get good information back on that controversial way to manage the fishery. So I think it's a good attempt. Did you have something, Doug?
Yeah, I agree with that. In fact, I thought we had already planned to have a half-day executive committee meeting before the August meeting to not only talk with John, but the Southeast Center representative. They were going to come up and talk to us about a variety of issues, including the next year's fiscal budget. So I think that should be already planned in our next for our August meeting.
Yeah, and just for future executive committee meetings, that's one of his intents, is to try to have that time. So I think that's a great opportunity, John. Is that satisfactory to you?
Oh, that satisfies me very much. Thank you very much. I appreciate the help here.
Anything else on that issue? If not, last issue, Emerson with the RSA.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just to recall that last summer, the Mid-Atlantic Fishery Management Council suspended the RSA, the Research Set-Aside Program. And while it's suspended, the council was to develop a plan to address problems with the RSA program and to make recommendations to improve that program. And some of the discussion last year at the council was that in early 2015, the council was going to develop a working group and hold a workshop to start to move the process forward. And I haven't heard anything about activity related to, restarting the Research Set-Aside Program. So I just, would ask that, there's people around this table who also sit on the Mid-Atlantic Council, and our executive director attends those meetings. So I would just ask that we continue to put some pressure on the council to move this process forward, and so that it doesn't, slip onto the back burner and then just completely off the stove and forgotten about. The program was suspended for 2015. The progress that's not being made here, there won't be anything in place for 2016. And if we don't start doing something relatively soon, it'll be too late for 2017. So, I would like to not have that program die just because of lack of activity. Thank you.
We can do that. Staff says we can do that and work and get that word out. Dave?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Have we ever defined our role in the discussion? I guess this is a question for Tony. Thank you.
I can't answer the status of where they are because I did not go to the last Mid-Atlantic Council meeting, and I'm sorry, Emerson, that I am not able to provide that information. But we have talked with the council, and Bob does sit on the RSA committee, as well as the council has agreed to invite states that do not have seats on the Mid-Atlantic Council to participate in that meeting when it happens. For example, Rhode Island and Massachusetts, who are impacted by RSA measures, but don't participate in the council level outside of the New England Council Management representative on the council now. So that is how we are moving forward in the talks of the changes to RSA. In terms of how we utilize RSA, while it's not as part of the FMP, we still do make motions to adjust quotas, et cetera, for RSA measures, and that during joint meetings, staff has asked that we make sure that reports from RSA projects get reported out during the times when we meet together so that the commissioners can hear about the results of the projects that are funded through RSA jointly with the Mid-Atlantic Council.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Anything else on the Emerson?
Yeah, thank you, Tony, for your explanation. I just wanted to highlight, though, that many of the species that are included in the RSA program, we also set the specs on those and allocate, the 3% off of the top to go to the RSA program. So we're very much involved in the process, and it comes off of, I don't want to say the commission's quota because it's the commission and council, but, we're helping to allocate those, or when the program was active, we were helping to allocate those fish.
Dave Pierce.
Yeah, another reason to promote discussion as to what's going on with the RSA, to involve Massachusetts and Rhode Island in particular, is that, if I understand correctly, the National Marine Fisheries Service has funded NEMAP, either all or most of it. So NEMAP, at least at this time, is not dependent on the auction of RSA fish, which means that if that funding continues for NEMAP, then collectively the states and the fishing industry from our different states would be in a position to try to get RSA fish to do specific research projects that we feel will be a benefit to our management initiatives, as opposed to just giving it to the auction for them to do with as they see fit, involving recreational fishermen and commercial fishermen in a way that I don't care to, well, I won't go there. It'll be used in a way it was originally designed to be used for good research as opposed to just giving it to NEMAP. So I'm looking forward to progress on the part of the Mid-Atlantic Council with our involvement to get this thing done and resolve the problems that have been identified.
We'll make it happen. Tony says we'll make it happen. That's all I have, but I wanted to go back to item number 9 because I cut off discussion on the winter flounder letter, thinking that I was running out of time, and I actually have until the next meeting's not until 2:30. So I did cut off debate there. So I know Tom Fody had his hand up to speak. I don't know if there were others, but Tom, if you want the floor to speak on, I'm sorry to bring that up without notice, but I felt like I should give you that opportunity.
No, all I wanted to say is I would like to see what areas would. This is the first I've heard about the dredging issue, and that's really was pushing this. Is people wanted the areas designated not as winter flounder areas, so they could dredge during a period of time that their eggs could be possible. Now, from Atlantic City south, there's questionable whether those eggs are present, but there's a lot of areas I know that there are still eggs present. So I want to see what exactly was passed by the New England Council, since it seems that we never got word of what was going on. And so any of that information you got, could you please make sure I get a copy of it?
We will. That, I think, was everything, and all the people I had signed up to speak, and I'm sorry for that, but I did think I was more pressed for time than I actually was. So if there's no other business to come before the ISFMP Policy Board, we will adjourn, and the